Hey everyone, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you for helping me reach 100 subscribers. I honestly couldn't have done this without your love, support, and constant encouragement. Every like, comment, and subscribe means a lot to me. Now let's keep this journey going. Our next target is 200 subscribers, and I know we can do it together. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's grow as a family. Thank you once again. When Luffy vanishes inside ancient ruins, the Straw Hats are pulled into a terrifying journey through his past. Trapped within Luffy's memories, the crew witnesses moments of brotherhood with Ace and Sabo, childhood pain, and scars Luffy never shared. As past and present blur, the Straw Hats must confront truths that were never meant for them to see, learning what truly shaped their captain. To escape, they must not only find Luffy, but also come to terms with the weight of the memories he carried alone. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Warm Memories and Brotherly Bonds by RoseDragonWitch. Respect to author.
Chapter 35, Mary's Tears and Sunny's Smile. Part 1. Everyone was celebrating and cheering at such a tremendous ending to the fight. It was one that none of them were likely to forget in a hurry, and it was just as amazing as the ending to the other fights in the past. Like Crocodile or Eneru, this was one for the record books. Though there were still a few of them that weren't as happy about this turn of events as they should have been. Though pleased and proud of seeing Luffy pull out a win, Zoro was deeply unsettled by all of this. He had always known that Luffy's gears, especially his second gear, were hard on him, but he had no idea until now just how dangerous they were for him. If what Chopper said was true, and he'd bet one of his swords that he was, then Luffy was slowly destroying his own body by using these techniques. Sure, Lucci's didn't do Luffy any good, but those gears of his only seemed to have made most of the damage. While he was glad to know that Luffy's gears don't hurt him nearly as much as they did back then, he still had bad feelings about them. He wasn't the only one who was worried. Robin was biting her lower lip anxiously, remembering just the kind of shape that Luffy had been in when they were forced to flee from Enies lobby. And Chopper was pulling so hard on his hat that he might have torn it if he wasn't more careful. He looked like he wanted to start scolding Luffy for how reckless he was behaving here. Because the little reindeer knew that it was true what Lucci said, Luffy could be shortening his own life for a few minutes of strength. It wasn't worth it to him. As for the Luffy they were watching right now, he was breathing almost painfully now. He seemed to be on the verge of passing out, judging from the way the memory flickered and faded in and out. All you have to do now is escape, right? Brooke asked anxiously, more than ready to see them leave Enies lobby behind them. You have a boat, everyone's on the bridge, and all of CP9's defeated. So you just have to make it to the ship and escape the rest of the bombardment. Yeah, but like with everything else, it sounds simple in theory, Sanji hissed. There was one thing we hadn't counted on. And what's that? Brooke asked nervously, wondering what in the world could have gone wrong when they were so close to the end. You're about to find out in a minute, Zoro said, grinding his teeth together. Brooke still looked confused and scared here, but at that moment they could hear more screaming going on from the speakers. But these screams were different. They were jubilant and full of excitement as they cheered for Luffy. And then they heard a familiar voice shouting out above all the noise, "Way to go, Straw Hat." Brooke recognized that voice. Isn't that Zambai? He asked. Yeah, those losers, Frankie said, his nose starting to run and tears welling up at the memory of finding out that his bros and sisters were alright. He'd never forget that awful moment when he heard the Marines broadcast, saying that everyone else on the island was dead. He was going to kill them someday for making him worry about them. Polly's voice then began to start shouting as well. You morons, keep it down. Everyone can hear us. It's a little late for that, Sanji smirked as Chopper cheered happily. Who cares? We want them to know. Zambai informed him and then screamed out, alright big bro. You guys, current Frankie sniffled before he turned away and began to sob unrestrained when he heard the other members of the Frankie family screaming out for him as well over the speakers. Stop it, they still think we're dead, remember? Polly yelled angrily at them all. You're gonna blow it. Dead. Brooke cried out in shock. Nami laughed a little, also feeling herself tear up in relief at these memories. It was like everything turned around for us when Luffy beat Lucci. See, they made an announcement that the Buster Call had killed everyone else left on the island. And we all thought for sure that. But there, they were all right the whole time. Frankie sobbed out as Usopp and Chopper patted his massive shoulders, and Chopper began to start crying along with him. Those morons. I wasn't scared. I mean, sniff, they can't die even if you kill him. And then he began to bawl. Oh, thank goodness. Brooke called, his heart also filling with delight at the news. Not that he had won, but he couldn't be happier for Frankie. He could only imagine how terrible it must have been for him when he honestly thought he lost his family here. Geez, I told you all to keep it quiet, Polly shouted at them. They really should, Sanji said, looking up at the dark smoke in the sky, still wondering how they were able to avoid getting themselves killed. Not that he was complaining, of course. They should have used this chance to escape before the Marines found out. Though now that I think about it, everyone was still focused on killing us. So I guess it really doesn't matter. They got away anyway, didn't they? Usopp smiled, that's all that counts. We're all okay. Everybody made it. They heard one of the other Frankie family members shouting out. That was close. The giants, they took all the cannon fire for us. And this time it came from either Kiwi or Mozu, they weren't sure which one. Giants. Brook repeated in confusion. He didn't remember seeing anything about giants. I'm sure Usopp will be more than happy to tell you about them later, Nami said quickly as the second square sister screamed out, Sodom and Gomorrah are okay too. Current Chopper cried out in joy, truly relieved to hear the happy news all over again. After all that happened, they needed good news for a change. But then his eyes fell on Luffy and his good mood faded. Though he knew that they all made it out alive, he couldn't help but feel his heart constrict when he saw the shape that Luffy was in. Look, it's not safe here, Polly shouted out angrily, those battleships will be coming back. We need to get moving now. Right, Zambai yelled in agreement to him before he shouted out. Listen up, we've got our escape plan figured out. Go, don't worry about us, let's all leave this place alive. Good, because we couldn't fit them all on our escape ship, Zoro said with a nod. They got out on the Puffing Tom right. Since the Marines were all focused on the Bridge of Hesitation at the back of the island, the front was pretty much unguarded, Robin informed him as she and Nami went over to kneel by Luffy's side, who was still struggling to breathe. I doubt that they ran into any serious trouble. Once they saw the front destroyed, the Marines all went around to the back to try to deal with us. Those are my boys, Frankie declared proudly. He couldn't remember being more proud of them all than he was here. See ya again real soon. Mozu or Kiwi declared fiercely before the second sister added, time to head out. And they could hear them all continue to scream out. At the same time that they'll meet up again. This is all joyous news. Brooks cried out as he danced around. It makes my soul want to sing I'm so happy. But then, he finally noticed that everyone's expressions remained rather tense and the happiness inside him began to fade. The Marines were starting to fight again, he could hear them from what remained of the bridge above them. He could hear the fighting and the shouts going on there, the explosions that continued to rain down around them, and given how everyone looked when he saw them shout out words of encouragement to Luffy to be Lucci, they were all injured and weak from their own battles. So why was Luffy still? What's wrong? He asked, as he noticed Chopper and the girl's anxious expressions as Luffy's breathing started to ease up again. He's not moving. No, Frankie said, having recovered from his tears, and look up at the sky as well. He's hurt, really hurt. What? Brook cried out in fear, before he ran over to join the group around Luffy's battered body. He's that hurt. It's more exhaustion than anything else, Chopper said quickly, glancing at them all, but it was his insides that were. He shivered as he remembered treating Luffy and had a good look over his condition. Whatever Lucci did with that final attack, it almost ended up destroying Luffy's internal organs. Our target is Straw Hat. Don't take your eyes off the first column. They suddenly heard one of the Marines order out. Right, understood sir. But he doesn't seem to be moving. Straw Hat Luffy is, sir, he appears to be severely wounded. They heard a second Marine yell. That got everyone's attention. After a battle like that, are you really surprised? Sanji said bitterly as he glanced up to the bridge where he could make out their own voices shouting at each other fearfully when they heard that announcement. Damn it, if only he had known the skywalk here. He could have got over and gotten Luffy himself. But then he remembered he wasn't even on the bridge at the moment and cursed to himself. But this is terrible. Brook screamed out, what are we gonna do? We can't do anything about it, Zoro reminded him darkly. We made it out of this mess alive 2 years ago, but it was by a miracle. There was no other way to describe what happened. I'm with you on that one, Usopp whispered, remembering the final ally who came to their rescue at the last second. Just thinking about her made him fall to his knees and tears started to fall. She shouldn't have, but he was so thankful that she did. Luffy, screamed his own voice just then, and everyone looked up to see Memory Usopp standing on the bridge again.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
What are you doing? Hurry up and get the hell over here. If we don't escape we're all gonna die. I think he knows, bro, Frankie said, racking his brains, trying to think of another way they could have gotten out of this mess. Nope, he couldn't think of one. At the sound of his voice, Luffy turned his head slowly, sounding like he was close to choking on his own blood, as he stared up at him. He really had me worried, the current Usopp confessed to them all. I was starting to think that he couldn't hear me. He could, Nami said shaking her head helplessly, but, what's wrong with you damn it? Memory Usopp screamed out, and he sounded close to crying again, we're almost there. Use your powers to slingshot over here. I'll carry you the rest of the way. I'm sure he's trying, Sanji said, but he agreed somewhat with what Usopp said. If he only had just 1 more ounce of energy. That rubber idiot scared them all half to death with this stunt. How dare he make Robin-chan and Nami Swan worry? Though deep down, he was scared out of his mind just as badly as they had been. Yet again though, Luffy just laid there, as if he couldn't understand a word of what his former crewmate was saying. We're surrounded by sea and battleships on all sides. If we stay here we're gonna be killed. Memory Usopp yelled desperately, as if hoping that if he reminded him of all this, then he'd get up. Luffy answer me. Say something. Yeah, we all knew that, Robin said, her insides racking with guilt as Brook looked ready to tear his hair out, still lost as to what was going on. But instead of touching his precious afro, he began to pull at his feathered boa with such intensity that it was starting to fall apart. Luffy seemed to be trying hard to do just that, but all they could really see was his fingers twitching slightly. The rest of his body just remained limp and lifeless as a doll's. I can't, he finally managed to get out through his heavy breathing. My body won't. Memory Usopp's eyes widened as Luffy grew angry, but not at Usopp, at himself. My body won't move. Won't move. Brook gasped out in horror. No, Chopper cried out, tears falling again. He put all that he had left in that last attack. I see it now. He was too exhausted and weak to even pull himself off the ground. And combined with all his injuries, he was temporarily paralyzed, Nami answered, her heart beating painfully in her chest as she looked back at how serious this had been. When she thought about how close a shave it had been that they escaped from this mess, it made her feel dizzy. No, Brook cried out in fear. How's he gonna make it out of this? Memory Usopp obviously thought the same thing. It won't move. They saw his mouth whisper those words to himself before he got angry again and began to yell, don't be stupid. You just beat Lucci, didn't you? And we've already saved Robin. The only thing left to do is run. Try harder. You can do it. Looking back, it's a good thing, Robin said, remembering what happened to the ship. If they had been on it, they'd have been blown to pieces. But Usopp might have been yelling at the wall for all the good it did. It was as if Luffy had fallen into the ocean, he just couldn't seem to bring himself to move. They could see it in his face that he was trying as hard as he could, but he might as well have been chained down. Usopp. They heard Memory Nami's voice screaming out along with the familiar buzz sound of lightning. Let's take the ship to Luffy. We'll grab him and get out of here. Everyone move. Get on board. Again, that was a good plan in theory, the current Nami said, shaking her head, and covering her ears just as they heard a great explosion, close enough that they could see the flames burning and shake what was left of the tower. What was that? Brook cried out, though he had a sinking feeling inside him what just happened. They blew up our escape ship the same way they destroyed that battleship earlier, Frankie answered quickly. Man, I thought we were screwed for sure when I saw that happening. How did you all escape then? Brook cried out in shock. He just couldn't see how it was possible, and the scenario was only made worse when he heard a Marine yell over the speakers again, force them to the second tower. Fire! And he could hear them. The loudest explosions yet, and this time it was the bridge itself. They could feel the heat on their faces, see the smoke and hear the booms going on as the blasting made their heads ring. Their past selves were all yelling, running as fast as they could from the other end of the collapsing bridge. As they watched, they could hear the screams and cries of pain of the Marines that were hit by the cannon fire of their own ships. No! Brook screamed out, and though he knew that the Marines were more than capable of doing something so atrocious, he just couldn't stand seeing how they were willing to kill their own men. Why does this always happen to us? They heard Memory Nami screaming out through the noise as the bridge was falling away in thick chunks, smoke rising into the darkened sky so that they couldn't see anything. Were they that scared of us that they killed all those people? Frankie demanded furiously. Looks like it, Sanji shouted, his hands over his ears at the noise. Soulless bastards. The whole lot of them. It was like the end of the world here. Usopp cried out. It had to be one of the scariest moments of his life surviving all this. At long last the firing stopped, but now the bridge was almost completely destroyed. All that remained was the one tower where Usopp had been on moments before. Looking closely, you could see the Straw Hats, Kokura, along with Chimney and Gondi all standing there, completely trapped. Brook was biting on his bony fingers, fear spreading throughout every part of his body. They were surrounded by battleships and ocean, the cannons were pointing right at them with nowhere to run, and their only chance to escape was just blown to pieces. He couldn't see how it was possible that they survived. In fact, if it wasn't for the matter that they were all standing next to him, he would say that they were done for here. Damn it, they took out the bridge. We're stuck on this column. Memory Sanji yelled. These bastards have got us cornered. Oh, ya think? Current Frankie yelled out. There's nothing else we can do. We're surrounded. Memory Zoro shouted out. Then this is where we'll make our stand. Past Nami shouted out, sounding unusually brave here. Let's fight. I'm surprised how well you were taking it, Nami. Robin said to her, I would have thought that you'd be freaking out. Adrenaline I guess, she offered with a shrug as their Usopp ran to the edge of the building they were in and looked over the ledge. I really thought that we were screwed too. But Usopp was no longer listening. He was staring over the edge where he had spotted her. So tiny compared to the battleships, and with the Marines' attention all on them, they didn't see her. But she slipped right past them all and was heading directly underneath them. At the sight of her, tears began to well up all over again. Mary, she had come, she had practically killed herself for them. Yet she came anyway. He was struggling to hold back the sobs as he heard Memory Frankie shouting at the others, "Don't be stupid. They'll just keep sending more and more of those captains at us. All ships, prepare to open fire on the first tower." A Marine ordered loudly and they could see the cannons from the battleships all slowly point towards them, and Luffy's eyes widen in fear. "All cannons take aim. Eliminate Straw Hat Luffy." "No, no, no." Brook cried out in fear, as a few of them made a grab for Luffy's body, but it was as if they had touched water, nothing happened. Present-day Nami glared at the ships as Frankie voiced her opinions on what the Marines were. "You cowards. You need all this to take on one person. WHO can't even move. Man up," he screamed out. "Wait," Brook called as he looked back to the place where Lucci lay, still bleeding heavily, and the pigeon had a bit of a bandage in its beak as it tried to help him. "What about Lucci? In this state, he'll die too. What makes you think they care?" Robin yelled, her face full of guilt as their past selves were now calling to Luffy to get up. "If they were willing to let all these soldiers die, what makes you think that they're going to care about an agent who lost? It doesn't matter who they are, to the world government, pirates, Marines, even citizens, they're all the same to them. Dispensable. As long as they can kill the enemy, any sacrifice is worth it. Some way to thank someone for all that they did." Zoro yelled as Chopper felt a surge of rage going through him. He may think that Lucci was a monster, but no one deserved this. "So he died here?" Brook gasped. "Not necessarily," Robin answered, "but now isn't the time." "Luffy!" Memory Usopp screamed, terrified at not being able to do anything. Luffy was trying harder than ever to move, his face full of fear as he hissed to himself, "Crap. This is bad. Bad. It's a hell of a lot more than bad." Current Sanji yelled at him. "Luffy!" Memory Usopp continued to scream, and he wasn't the only one. The others were all screaming, begging, and encouraging him to try to move, to think of something to get himself out of this. As the way that things were, they were just too far away to help him. They all hated to admit it, but with no way they could have gotten to him without flying, there wasn't anything they could do for him. Straw Hat. They could hear members of the Frankie family were screaming through the speakers, who must have heard the announcement of Luffy being hurt. "Stand up, Straw Hat. Stand up. Come on, stand up." Kokoro also started up, and here even she sounded scared. "Pirate guy run," Chimney shouted out desperately. "I can't take this." Brook yelled, his hands to his head. "The suspense is killing me. Though I have already died before. No wait, now is not the time. We sure cut this one too close," Zoro stated, his one eye looking bloodshot at how fast everything was moving. Louder than all of them, Memory Nami screamed, "Luffy! Hurry! Move it! Damn it! You got to do something right now, Luffy!" Past Sanji hollered. Looking at all now, they realized just how much they were putting on Luffy. He had given his all, had his ass beaten to within an inch of his life, and here they were yelling at him. But they couldn't help it. They honestly thought that it was going to end here for all of them. Luffy shut his eyes tightly, and they could see the remorse in his own face at the sight of seeing how his crew could have escaped earlier, but had instead chosen to wait for him. And now he was too weak to do anything but lay there and wait for the end. "If we're going to go out, we're going out together," Chopper cried out, almost forgetting that they did survive this madhouse. "No one was going to die here on my watch." There, Frankie said loudly. He had been willing to die to get the Straw Hats out of this mess back here. He died once already and it wasn't that bad, he would have done just about anything to make sure that these guys lived to see another day. "No, I'm in trouble," Luffy muttered to himself as he shut his eyes, as if waiting for the guns to start firing. Everyone in the memory was terrified, begging that he do something because he was going to die if he stayed there. But just as it looked at its worst, something else happened. They heard a strange sound, almost like an echo of whale song in the back of their minds. It was as if the sea itself was trying to tell them something. At the sound, everyone froze, remembered just who it was. Brook gave a sharp intake of breath, staring around for the sound. He had lived for almost a century now, but he had never heard a voice quite like this one. "What?" Luffy whispered, his eyes snapping open. "Look, below. What is going on?" Brook croaked out a whisper, still not able to figure out what was going on. Usopp, who hadn't left his spot by the ledge, still staring downward, was joined by his past self who was also looking down. Both of their shoulders were shaking from suppressed tears. All ships opened fire on the first column and Straw Hat Luffy. The Marine yelled, "Commencing in 5. No, Luffy." Memory Nami shrieked in fear, but before she could say anything else, it was Memory Usopp who gave them the order what to do.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
"Jump in the sea." "What?" Brook cried out his shock. "Just jump. They'd die for sure." Not to mention they had 3 devil fruit users with them. Don't worry, current Usopp said as he finally stood back up and rubbed his eyes fiercely on the back of his arm. We were protected the whole time. Usopp-san, Brook asked, baffled as to what he was saying as the others all headed to the ledge with him and the Marine had counted down to 4. The sea. Memory Usopp continued to yell before he turned to Robin and cried out, "Robin, can you still get Luffy into the sea?" "Leave it to me," they heard her voice, though they couldn't see her. "Are you trying to kill us?" Memory Zoro demanded as he continued fighting with the Marines. "Jump in the sea won't help a damn thing." But as his past self yelled that, the current Zoro saw something out of the corner of his one good eye. He glanced back to see where Lucci was lying, for one horrible moment thinking that he was going to get up again, but instead his eye widened at what he saw. Hovering right next to him was the same kind of door that Bluno made before when Luffy was fighting. That air door. 3. The Marine went on. With everyone's attention focused on Luffy and Usopp at the moment, no one else noticed. But Zoro stared in amazement as a battered Bluno appeared through the opening door. He was bleeding and looked like he was fighting hard to stay conscious as he suddenly grabbed hold of Lucci's arms and pulled him inside the strange, green space inside the door, the pigeon fluttering around for a brief moment before it followed them inside. Turning his whole head around to look, Zoro could just make out the forms of some of the other CP9 members all badly injured inside. He was so shocked at what he saw, that he barely heard what memory Usopp called out, with sobs in his voice, "We're gonna be safe. She came to rescue us. Jump. It'll be okay. We still have one more friend here." "What do you mean by, she?" Brook cried out, frustrated at how lost he was here, but the others were all smiling. 2. The Marine counted down as Bluno finished pulling Lucci inside and the door slowly shut behind them. No sooner after that, arms began to grow like flowers out of the floor, which could only belong to Robin. They popped up right underneath Luffy, and carefully lifted his wounded body up, his eyes widening. 1. The Marine finished counting. "I'm moving," Luffy gasped out before he understood. "Robin, hope you don't mind, Captain," the current Robin said, as more arms flowered up until they formed a kind of road to the ledge before he was being rolled over and over on them as he was carried to the hole and let out soft yelps of pain. "But I didn't have time to be gentle." And one by one, Sanji, Nami, and Chopper all called out 3 words, any traces of fear that had been there were long gone. "To the sea." And without any hesitation, the present-day Straw Hats jumped out through the hole just as Luffy was tossed by Robin's hands, and as soon as he looked down, Brook finally understood the sense of hope that everyone had. "I don't believe it," he cried out in amazement. "Jump. Follow Luffy." Memory Usopp declared as he was the first one out of the rest of them to jump after Luffy. "Go." Memory Sanji and Nami cried as they jumped next. "Go." The past versions of Chopper, Zoro, and Frankie also jumped, with Zoro throwing a paralyzed Chopper in front of him and Frankie even striking his pose as he followed. "What hams we were here." Current Sanji roared with laughter as he felt the wind rush past him. "We earned it." Frankie laughed. "Come on, after all that. Why not?" Finally, Memory Robin, Kokura, Chimney, and Gandhi were the last ones to take the leap. "To the sea." They cried as they all fell together, each one with a look of joy and relief on their faces when they saw who was waiting for them. "Let's go back everyone," a voice echoed, as if in the back of their minds, a young and cheerful voice. "Back to the seas of adventure." "Fire!" a Marine bellowed, and behind them the first tower practically blew up. They could feel the blast heat behind them, and knew that if Memory Robin had been any slower, Luffy would have been blasted to pieces. But they didn't care, for waiting for all of them on the sea was a familiar figure. Battered and falling apart like she always was, looking like she had just fought her way through a battle herself, was the last member of their crew. "Everyone." Memory Usopp bellowed with tears of happiness in his eyes again, "Get on board the Mary." "Mary." Luffy hollered, light shining in his eyes. "I came to get you." She answered in that same echoing voice as they hit the water and everything vanished for a moment. "This is incredible," Brook called, and if he had eyes, they'd be shining in astonishment. "Lamb-chan came to save you all. She really was alive, wasn't she? Her name was Mary." "And yes, she was," Usopp said proudly, a hand over his heart as he thought of her. "She really was like a member of the crew. She had been protecting us and looking after us since day one." He sniffled a little as he finished drying his eyes, though he knew that it was only going to be a matter of time before he started bawling again. To see Mary's last moment. He shook his head, knowing that it wasn't going to be as hard as it had been the first time at Mary's funeral, but it wasn't going to be easier either. "Truly a miracle," Brook said in awe. "She really was alive. I can scarcely imagine seeing a ship as." He couldn't think of a way to describe how dumbfounded he was, any word to explain just how wonderful Mary was, but the others all understood. "I know," Zoro said, looking up in the dark sky, but couldn't help but think that it looked a little lighter now. "It must be early in the morning. I was there, and I still can't believe it." Mary was one heck of a ship, Frankie nodded as the others all shared smiles with each other as they thought about the Mary. "And even though I only rode on her once, I was honored to do so. I only hope that one day that the Sunny will become as brave as Mary was." Something tells me that she will, Robin smiled, gazing up at the sky as well, letting a single tear fall from her face as she thought to herself, thank you too, Mary. Sunny did inherit Mary's spirit, that's for sure, Nami whispered, her heart feeling as if it was filling up. We owe her so much. But their thoughts were interrupted once again when the memory appeared. They were back on the worn-out and battered deck, this setting some of them off on another round of tears. Eager to see their grand escape, they went running over to the side of the ship where they saw Kokura bobbing her head out of the water. Alrighty, up you go, Kokura yelled as she pulled the 3 devil fruit users out of the sea and rather rudely tossed them up to the deck. Hope you enjoyed the ride. Luffy was the first one to land, still as limp as a noodle, his eyes rolling from the back of his head as he tried to breathe once again. Chopper had also flopped around like a fish before Frankie caught Robin, with Memory Sanji looking ready to cry from disappointment. The current one was gritting his teeth. Damn, why was it that it seemed like everyone but him seemed to come to the rescue to the 2 loves of his life? Why couldn't that be him, for crying out loud? He wanted dear Robin and Nami to look at him with love-struck eyes just once. Was that too much to ask for? We're on the Mary, cried Chopper's voice, and they looked to see that Memory Chopper was flopping almost as helpless as Luffy was. We're back on the Mary. I love you, Mary. I love you so much, thank you, Mary. Chopper-san, are you alright? Brook asked anxiously. Yeah, of course, Chopper answered, still wishing that he could have regained the ability to move before now so that he could help them fight. I just ended up using my monster point to fight Kumadori. But I don't remember too much after that. He trailed off, feeling embarrassed as Zoro said, but you did take that guy out, right? And you're still breathing last time I checked. So that's all that matters. Yes, we can't do everything all the time, Robin added kindly, and Chopper turned even redder at that. His past self wasn't the only one crying. Memory Usopp was touching the mast, looking ready to collapse. Mary, my sweet Mary, is still alive. I don't understand. How did you make it here? How? I wish I could give you a hug, Mary. But I can't move. Past Chopper cried out at the same time. I still wish I knew how she did it, current Usopp whispered as Memory Frankie spoke up. It doesn't make sense, he said, staring around at the ship in wonder. I saw this ship drop into the ocean myself. Drop into the ocean? Current Nami asked, remembering that they did say something along those lines before, but never found out what they were talking about. Not that it's important, Frankie said quickly, and jerked a massive thumb at Usopp, but I was hoping to use this guy here to draw Luffy out so that we could have that rematch. The Frankie family had a secret hideout under one of the bridges and I let him repair the ship there. Long story short, the hideout was way off the ground and we had to pull her up by ropes in a homemade elevator to get her up there. Not long after that, those CP9 jerks broke in and took care of us easy. And Kaku was the one who cast Mary out to sea in the middle of Aqua Laguna. Like Mary would die that easily. Chopper yelled fiercely. But then how did she? Brook began, but the memory was still continuing and they forgot all about their questions as they watched. The question is, who sailed it here? Memory Nami asked, staring around her. We'll figure it out later. Past Zoro yelled down at her. Just get us out of here. I don't get why it took everyone so long to remember that we weren't out of danger yet, current Zoro said, rolling his eye. Well, we get distracted easily. Nami retorted angrily as her past self remembered what was going on. Right, she called, let me think. And soon everyone but Luffy and Chopper were running around the Mary, getting everything ready to make their escape. Luffy spat out the rest of the water from his lungs before he panted for air again. That was close one. He gasped out, I thought those battleships were gonna blow me up for sure. We all did. Don't ever do that again. Current Nami snapped at him. She couldn't bear the thought of seeing something like that ever again. Why did he have to be so selfless that it was selfish? Luffy turned his head to Robin, who was kneeling down next to the side of the ship, her back to them all. Hey, Robin, he gasped out, you saved me, thanks But he never finished. Memory Robin simply raised her hand and grew an arm out of Luffy's chest so that it covered his mouth. After everything that happened, none of you had to thank me, Robin said, shaking her head. The truth was, she couldn't say she deserved to be thanked. She hadn't done anything, but was the one who caused all of this. To hear him thank her after all that he and the others went through because of her would have been too much. Her past self slowly turned and got up, a smile, a true smile, on her face as she looked at each one of them. Luffy, everyone, thank you, she said, and though they could hear the gratitude, the joy, in her words, there was a slight awkwardness. As if she had almost forgotten what it was like to be able to trust someone with your life. The moment was just so tender, that you half expected a large group hug to join in. But not a one of them said a word, for none was needed. This was just one of those moments that didn't need words to understand just what needed to be said. Luffy just grinned and said, as if they helped her with a tiny problem and it wasn't worth making a big deal over it, don't worry about it. They all smiled at watching the scene, everyone truly contented at this moment, at least until Memory Zoro broke it by speaking. That's nice, but save the sappy stuff until after we escape, he said in a bored voice. Zoro-san. Brook cried out. How could break such a touching scene? My heart was going out to you all. Not that I have a heart, but still. In case you morons all forgot, we were still in danger. Zoro yelled, and he suddenly remembered how depressed they all were when they left Vivi behind in Alabasta. People come and go all the time, there's no reason to get all emotional about it, especially when they were all still in a lot of danger of being killed by battleship. Everyone scowled at him and his past self. In fact, Memory, Sanji and Chopper picked a fight with him, demanding that he apologize to Robin. After finding out that he could move again, Chopper turned into his heavy point and was twisting Zoro around, as Sanji poked at him, trying to get him to say sorry. But all that he did was howl in pain as Chopper twisted his legs up like a pretzel. That was dirty, the current one growled as the others laughed at what they were seeing. Gaining up like that. Just wait until we get out of this mess, and then I'll take care of you both. Good luck with that, Sanji taunted. I'll take you on any day of the week. I'm gonna kick your ass so hard that you're gonna wish you were never born. Don't you ever get tired of hearing your own voice? Zoro mocked him back and a muscle went in Sanji's forehead. Would you two knock it off? Nami yelled at them both just as her past self called, okay. Let's move. You guys ready to move? Not a single one of them disagreed. The ship was already practically ready to go, and they turned her around, about to finally escape, at least until the battleships pointed all their cannons at them. And at this distance, Brook whispered, knowing that the odds of them missing were practically zero. They may be small, but with this many cannons all around them. Well, they pulled off one miracle already. Let's see them pull off another. Over the noise, they heard Spandam on one of the ships screaming girlishly, something about how all the Straw Hats were to die, including Robin. They could hear him shout something about Aokiji ordering it. Wait, Aokiji? Brook gasped. He was lying is my bet, Sanji said firmly, he just didn't want to let us escape with his meal ticket. Like hell I was gonna leave my beautiful Robin with him. So that Spand is still alive, huh? That sucks, Memory Frankie barked in irritation. I'll say, the current one said bitterly. I mean, damn it what's it gonna take to make sure that bastard stays down? We've got more important things to deal with. Current Chopper yelled. They're gonna fire. Memory Usopp cried, until Memory Nami came to the rescue by telling them that they had to catch the wind from the starboard side and head due east from here. We can't. Memory Zoro interrupted her, we're completely surrounded. Can't things ever go right for us? Present-day Usopp shouted in frustration. Why does everything have to be so hard? Keeps things interesting, Zoro offered. Like we need all the extra excitement. He shouted back. All those big, scary cannons and they're aimed straight at us. Past Usopp hollered in terror. At this range, and with that many ships, there's no way they're gonna miss, Past Frankie added, that only caused Usopp to scream even more. Fire! They heard one of the Marines shout. And yet, even though they were right in front of them, they missed by a mile. Not only that, but they were hitting the other battleships. There was fire burning all around them already, Marines screaming and falling into the sea, it was almost funny if it wasn't so serious. Now what happened? Brooke shouted out, his jaw dropping. Surely they can't be that bad at aiming. But then, something else happened. The ships were being rammed, or maybe crashing rather, right into each other. The ships cracked and broke apart even further, and it only took them a few extra seconds to realize why. The gates of justice were closing, in other words, the whirlpools were back and that was what was causing them to drift off course. What luck! Brook cried cheerfully. It was more than just luck. Sanji laughed proudly. Brook found out what he was talking about very quickly. Memory Sanji was laughing as he ran to get a good look at the pandemonium. That was better than I thought. At his words, Memory Usopp asked him in a stunned voice if that was what he had been doing while he was gone, which Sanji smiled smugly. He pointed to his head and said that he figured that it would take a lot more than just guts to get them out of here alive, so while they were fighting on the bridge, he went running around trying to find out how to close the gates. Both Luffy and Past Usopp began to praise him, calling him a genius before Memory Zoro yelled furiously, it's a little early to be kissing his ass. The whirlpools are a problem for us too. Once he heard that, Past Usopp screamed in terror again before he turned on Sanji. Oh, great. Thanks a lot Sanji. Maybe, but we had an expert navigator on our side to get us through this mess, Robin smiled and Nami beamed proudly. It was one heck of a plan, and it was probably what saved us here, she confessed. At hearing Nami praise him, Sanji gripped his heart dramatically. Now, I know I'm in heaven. Yeah, right smack dab in the middle of hell, Frankie whispered under his breath. Amazing. Brook laughed, it's not every day you get to see heaven and hell all at once. Yo ho ho ho. Would you shut up? Past Nami yelled at them all, getting everyone's attention. It's not a problem. As long as we're together, there's no sea the going merry can't cross. Right, yeah, of course. Present-day Chopper screamed out in agreement. We're gonna sail over every ocean out there one day. A day of great joy that I look forward to. Brook cried out just as excitedly. Robin laughed along with them, the idea sounded just too perfect to her. Their past selves all cheered at Nami, trusting her completely as he told them to hold them off while she calculated the right path for them to take. After leaving it to her, she pulled out a small notebook, writing out a series of complex calculations and notes as she studied the tides and whirlpools. Chopper went inside with Chimney, Gonbi, and Kokura as he began to steer, going wherever Nami told him to. The rest of them worked on defending the ship. One sword style, 36 caliber Phoenix. Memory, Zoro cried, taking out 5 cannonballs at once. He landed and grunted in irritation as he looked at the 2 swords he held. Since I lost a sword I can't do a full 108 Phoenix. What happened to it? Brook asked, before suddenly remembering the dead sword that Zoro left at Thriller Bark. I fought one of those stupid marines who ate the rust fruit, Zoro said bitterly. One touch, and he was able to rust just about anything. He rusted my sword to dust. He sighed as his hand went to the newest of his swords. He was just glad that he found such a good replacement. He would have to be more careful with them. Why don't you go cry about it? Memory, Sanji taunted. I'm gonna make you cry. He shouted back. The defense was able to keep up very well. Sanji would jump up and kick back any stray shot that Zoro or Usopp missed. Robin would grow out a kind of arm net to prevent the black balls from hitting the mast while Frankie caught them and threw them right back as if he was throwing baseballs. We don't want him. Take him back, he yelled. Such teamwork never fails to amaze me. Brook said excitedly, feeling a little left out once again. How he wished that he could have been a part of the crew for so much longer than he had been. And to make things worse, he was only with them for such a short time before they were separated for 2 years. But still, he was seeing these memories now, and he felt that their strong bond couldn't grow any stronger. He never really thought about joining a new pirate crew during those lonely years trapped in that dark fog, but he couldn't have picked a crew that he would rather be on. Oh, he couldn't wait to find Luffy and to talk to him about all the amazing things that he had seen them do. Speaking of which, Luffy wanted to help protect the ship as well. He had finally managed to regain movement in some parts of his body, but he couldn't even stand up. Instead, he was forced to crawl around like an inchworm, forced to use his teeth to get up the stairs. You've done enough, Luffy, current Nami sighed, you could leave the rest of it to us. Like he'd listen. Sanji asked her, you know as well as we do how stubborn he is. When everyone else is fighting, he wants to be there. Even if he can't move. Don't worry, we made him feel useful, Zoro smirked. What do you mean by that, Zoro-san? Brook asked, suddenly concerned. Guys, save some for me, I wanna fight them too. Luffy whined from where he lay. Oh really? Memory, Usopp demanded harshly, are you gonna squirm them to death? I hate to break it to ya Captain, past Sanji said, landing from another well-placed kick, but I think this one is our battle. Take a nap, we'll be done, Zoro yelled as he used another flying attack. Soon. Seriously, he looks like he could use one, Frankie nodded, not liking the way that Luffy was still bleeding over on the deck. You go take a nap. Luffy grunted as he continued to drag himself, this time using his whole face. I'm gonna beat these guys, you'll see. I just gotta get there. And what are you going to do if you can't stand up? Chopper yelled out, though he knew the feeling of being helpless when the rest of your friends were fighting for their lives, so he couldn't completely blame Luffy here. Memory, Zoro grew angry, yelling at him to get out of the way, with Luffy yelling back that he couldn't tell him what to do. So, either they wanted to shut him up or really make him feel useful. Both Memory, Zoro and Sanji grabbed hold of him and stretched him out like a blanket. So when the largest group of cannonballs came flying at them, they used Luffy like a slingshot. By catching the balls in his stomach before they were able to throw them all back, causing more damage than ever. OWWW, Brook winced, rubbing his ribcage. Even for a man made out of rubber, that looked like it hurt. Luffy's eyes were rolled back again, and he lay on the deck as lifeless as ever. Because of how badly injured he was, he certainly felt that level of pain. You never let us down, do ya Captain? Memory, Zoro grinned as the two of them checked to make sure that he was still breathing. I guess we needed you after all. Past Sanji laughed as Luffy let out a feeble groan. You people are monsters. Memory, Usopp yelled at them all, and they all answered by holding up the V for victory sign for them, not even trying to deny it. Did you have to do that? Nami demanded angrily, wanting to beat up both these two idiots. Especially at how beat up Luffy was. Not our faults, Zoro answered. Luffy wanted to fight, so we helped him out with it. Not only that, but he saved our hides here, right? While I can't say that I approve of how you did it, it's nice seeing you boys get along, Robin said, watching them. How could they be proud to call themselves monsters? Usopp thought to himself. Well, whatever works for them, he supposed. At that moment, Memory Nami shut the notebook and looked up smiling. I've got it, she told them all. The path to victory. She then turned to Chopper in the cabin and called to him, Chopper. Helm hard to port. 9 o'clock. At her words, Chopper turned and they headed straight for the waterfall. But thanks to the whirlpools they ended up hitting a current that boosted their speed so much that they were zipping right past each one of the battleships. Though big and dangerous, those ships were slow and bulky, and it took everything the Marines had to keep them from capsizing. Let's go. Luffy cried out from where he lay, having recovered from his role as a slingshot. Full speed ahead. You're really going to make it out of here? Brooke cried out in amazement. I never would have believed it if I didn't see it with my own eyes. Ah, though I don't have eyes anymore, yo-ho-ho-ho. I never did get how you can see without eyes. Chopper looked up at his empty sockets curiously. It's a secret, Brooke informed him happily until he noticed Memory Robin gradually walk up the stairs so that she stood at the back of the ship with the rest of them. She stood there as she kept her eyes focused on one ship in particular. Spandam was still there, his face so swollen that it looked to the point that it was similar to a child's crude creation of a head made of clay. Memory Robin stood just at the railing and crossed her arms, there was no mercy in her eyes. They all looked up at Spandam to see that he had several arms grown through his body, steadily pulling him backwards. But he wasn't able to cry out since one of Robin's many hands covered his mouth. The current Robin didn't regret it. It wasn't much, but she at least got some revenge for what his father did to her home, and for the cruelty that this loser had done to her and her friends. At least maybe after this, he realized that he wasn't as powerful as he had thought he was. And finally her past self seemed to finish savoring what she was about to do. Clutch, she said, and even from this far away they could all hear the loud break of bone breaking. And all of a sudden, his body tumbled and fell out of sight like a sack of rocks. OWWW, Chopper winced, knowing that guy must have been snapped right in half. Good, Frankie said, not at all sorry for that bastard, truly glad to see some payback for his part in Tom's death. Tom, he thought with a rather evil smirk, wherever you are right now, I hope that you enjoyed seeing that idiot get turned into bloody hamburger. Maybe next time he'll think before he's willing to sacrifice all those lives, Brooke said angrily. I doubt there'll be a next time, Zoro said with a shrug. He's out of our hair and that's all that I care about. None of the memory straw hats said anything else as Robin lowered her arms and they watched silently for a few more minutes before past Nami cried out, all right Frankie. It's time to do your thing. You got it, he yelled, and he leapt lightly into the air before landing on the back of the deck where Robin had been. Get ready kids cause this is gonna be wild, he told them as he pulled his sunglasses down and held up his arms. Well, you better hurry. Present-day Sanji called, pointing to the front where a couple of battleships were trying to block them off. Don't worry, the current Frankie said confidently, you can always count on Super Me. Just so you know, his past self said as his arms began to fill with air. This might bang up your ship a bit. Sorry about that, but the present one looked away. He knew that this old girl had reached the end, it didn't matter if he hurt her or not at this point, it was just too late to do anything else. But he couldn't bring himself to say any of this before his past self blasted the air out. Coup de vent. With a blast, they took off, breaking the surface of the water and they were soaring upwards to the sky, hearing the screams of shock and disbelief from everyone behind them. They couldn't help but laugh at the sight of it all. Really, it had been worth all the pain just to see the looks of stunned shock on their faces. Memory Usopp pulled out another projectile and fitted into his slingshot before he called down to the Marines, if you think the Mary's an ordinary ship, then you're wrong. She's flown through the air once and she can do it again, no problem. He then launched it, seeing the little weapon spiral through the air, creating a thick cloud of smoke to stop them in their tracks. They were all laughing, past and present, as they landed a good distance away from what was left of Eni's lobby. They continued desperately to fire cannonballs at them, but they could no longer reach them. Memory Zoro didn't even have to defend the ship as the black balls hit harmlessly just behind them. He looked back at them all with a satisfied smirk and Luffy laughed as they set sail. In less than 12 hours, a small band of misfits invaded Eni's lobby, took on the best team of assassins that the government had, took back the 2 people whom were taken from them, and the government ended up destroying their own island by their own hands. A touch of their own justice. And soon they were all going, until all they could see in the distance was the dark sky far behind them where the fire continued to burn. We did it. Both choppers screamed out in joy, jumping around and soon everyone was in on the celebration. They laughed and most of the members were all hugging each other in joy. Even Luffy managed to punch the air with his fists, despite the fact that he still couldn't stand up. Ow, that was even more kick-ass than the first time we saw it. Current Frankie roared with laughter as he and Usopp began to a jig, with Chopper perched on their shoulders. Yo-ho-ho-ho. Truly a miraculous thing to see. Brook cried out in joy as he picked up the guitar and began to sing them all part of a song he had just written. I know we're strong cause I got you by my side. And, baby, I will protect you till the end of time. So take your hand, throw it up to the sky. There it is, right there is your power. We fight together. That was one hell of a day, Zoro smirked. And boy did our bounties go through the roof after that stunt. Not just anyone declares war against the whole world, Robin smiled. I still can't believe it and I was there the whole time. She felt a faint blush go to her cheeks as she added, thank you. They all smiled at her as Chopper jumped over to her and gave her a hug. Any time, he told her as she only too happily hugged him back. You sure you wanna sit on top of that sheep's head? Asked Kokura's voice, and they glanced up in time to see the old mermaid draping Luffy's limp body onto Mary's head. Sanji, Usopp, and Brook shivering at seeing the scales on her legs. Course I do. Luffy said cheerfully, that's the captain's seat. Well, there ya go, be careful not to fall, she said as she laughed. Sure, thanks for the help Monster Granny, he said, turning his head back to look at her, you're the best. She sure is, despite what you boys think, Nami said crossly to them all. Though she had to admit that she could never get used to the idea of seeing Kokoro with a mermaid's tail. Luffy then turned his head back down to look at the lamb's head and added, and thank you Mary. We never would have made it out of there if it wasn't for you. I was pretty surprised when you showed up. Hell, we all were, Zoro couldn't help but add. He honestly thought that they were dead meat. In fact, they would have been. There was no other way they could have escaped from Enies lobby without her. Come to think of it, it was as if fate had set things up this way. Everything from Frankie stealing their money, to right at this moment, it's as if destiny had something special planned out for them. But when I think about it, Luffy went on, you've always been there to protect us. We've always counted on you. Anyway, I'm just happy you've been part of the team, Mary. You're a good friend to have. Not just a good friend, Usopp said, a smile on his lips. She was the best. Oh, Lamb-chan, how I wish that we could have met in real life. Brook cried, tears falling from his face. Truly the most amazing ship that I have ever seen. You mean to tell me that she sailed herself here? That she was truly. Yeah, Frankie said in amazement. I never would have thought it was possible. I don't know how she knew that we were in trouble, but she must have been determined to see everyone at least one last time before the end came for her. She wanted to make sure that she got you all to safety before she. He couldn't go on, but they didn't need him to. I love you, Mary. Chopper cried out. We'll never forget all that you did for us. And soon he was bawling as Brook looked around at everyone's sudden grim expressions. What happened to Lamb-chan? He asked nervously. It's Mary, Usopp said for what felt like the millionth time. Mary. And, well, he just didn't know what to say. I don't mean to spoil the mood, Memory Frankie interrupted as he folded his arms. But damn, you guys did some crazy stuff back there. Luffy, looking much more comfortable and at ease than he had since Usopp left the crew, rolled over onto his back. I don't think the government's gonna let you off that easily after you burned down their flag. Whatever, Luffy said in an unconcerned voice, as if Frankie was just talking about the weather. It doesn't feel like a big deal to me. The only reason I did any of that was cause they took our friend and we wanted her back. Zoro smirked again. One thing he always did like about Luffy was his humble nature. He doesn't brag about the powerful foes he's beaten in the past. In fact, he's talking about it like he did it on mere whim. He chuckled. Ah, that rubber idiot was one of a kind. No doubt. Luffy slowly raised his head a little to look at Frankie and added, and we couldn't have done what we did without your help, so thanks a lot. That was the first time that the two of them had a talk that didn't have any anger or insults. Luffy was simply thanking Frankie for all that he had done, and that they couldn't have saved Robin without him. They all smiled at how embarrassed that Frankie was. He laughed a little as he scratched the back of his head and added, well, like you said, it really wasn't that big a deal. I just did what I had to do. Ah, it sounds like you've grown fond of us in the short time that we've known you, Nami teased and he laughed. Hey, making the government pay for what they did to my old master was something I've wanted to do for years, he answered her with a laugh. Everyone knew about Enies lobby and the might of the world government, but you guys didn't care. You didn't just knock at the front door, you broke it down. Now you guys were my kind of people. As they talked and laughed, Zoro and Sanji's eyes narrowed dangerously as they felt something, not that they were entirely surprised. To be honest, they had a feeling that he would show up after all this. The point is, we're all together, Luffy went on, we're coming back in one piece. And this fight was our victory. And with whatever energy he had, he raised his fists into the air and they all cheered, with the memory of seeing the Mary's flags blowing in the wind, as if celebrating with them. But as the memory faded, Zoro flicked out his swords. What's wrong? Nami asked quickly, her smile fading. Hey, Moss Head, Sanji said, using up what was left of his cigarette and throwing the butt onto the ground. You think it's? No doubt, Zoro said grimly, and so we better do something quick. Wait, what are you talking about? Usopp yelled out with a squeak. Our friend is back, Sanji growled as the familiar ball of slime suddenly rose up around their feet. But when they backed away, almost running, the familiar form rose up around them. And at the sight of him, it made them all feel sick to their stomachs. In his hybrid form, the massive and muscular body stood there with his claws shining sinisterly. The spots sticking out despite the fact that he was made of slime, and a cruel smile curled up and over his lips. It was a face that none of them had never wanted to see again. Lucci, Robin whispered as Chopper, Nami, Usopp, and Brook all screamed in terror at the sight of him. Slime Lucci merely grinned even wider as Zoro gave the order to lead this overgrown cat back to the ruins as fast as they could. I will not allow any evil to prosper in this world, Slime Lucci declared as he raised his clawed hand and struck. Luffy, come out wherever you are, Ace yelled tauntingly, walking calmly down a pathway that he had taken countless times in his youth. He knew where he was heading to now. Their fight had gone on for so long now that he was starting to get tired. It was, without a doubt, the longest that Luffy had ever been able to hold his own against him. But that only makes sense. He had been watching over Luffy throughout every minute of the hard training that he had gone through. He put himself through hell for 2 long years to get stronger. Ace knew that Luffy will only continue to get stronger. As for himself, it's funny how things have come full circle, he said when he came to the very edge of the bandit's house. It looked just like it had always been. The worn-out crappy hut still stood there, with fresh laundry hanging on the clothesline, as if Dayton or one of the others just hung it out to dry. Everything was just like it was, including the person who was sitting in their old fort. He walked calmly over to where Luffy sat inside it and looked around with a strange look in his eyes. Hard to believe how much time's passed, huh? Luffy asked him. It's been so long since I've seen this place. It all looks the same but you aren't the same anymore, Ace answered as he sat down next to him. I know the feeling. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Warm Memories and Brotherly Bonds by RoseDragonWitch. Luffy frowned a little before he glanced at Ace and said, "You're still as strong as I remember." When Ace glanced at him, Luffy added, "After all that training, it's still not easy fighting you. It was the reason you were never able to beat me in the first place," Ace reminded him with a smile. "Before, you couldn't even throw a punch without hitting yourself in the face." Luffy laughed a little as he thought about that. "I remember that. You and Sabo laughed your asses off at that." He laughed a little more before his eyes widened and he remembered something. "Hey, I haven't seen Sabo for a while. Where is he?" Finally noticed, huh? Ace laughed, smiling a little farther, and Luffy tilted his head a little. "Oh, don't worry about him. He probably had something else to do. But I'm sure that you'll get your chance to see him again, don't worry. He probably feels that this is something you and I need to finish." "Really?" Luffy asked, folding his arms in disappointment. Ace just smiled wider, wondering if he should tell Luffy the truth. He had been stunned to find out the truth about their brother. In fact, he wasn't sure if he wanted to laugh or cry when he discovered what happened. More than anything else, he wanted to punch Sabo right in the face when he heard. The two of them had let Luffy know that Sabo had been here all this time, which wasn't the complete truth. But he would say this much. The boy who had been with them earlier had been their real brother. Luffy thought it over before he looked long and hard at Ace's face. It was true that he felt so much better than he had before. He had gotten to say everything that had been on his mind for 2 long years, and he felt freer than he had for a long time. But he looked away, knowing that there was one more thing that had been bothering him for a long time about his brother's death. But he didn't know how to say it this time. "You're always making me worry about you," Ace said as Luffy looked back up. He was remembering the last time they had sat together like this. The night before he left this island behind and heading out on his own. How he was leaving his little brother behind and leaving his reason for living to head out and basically start over. But he knew that it was the right thing to do. Luffy didn't need him there to protect him anymore. He could pretty much take care of himself. He knew how to hunt, and his fighting had gotten to a point that he could fight guards and the thugs from the gangs on his own. Even the monsters in the middle forest were no match for his baby brother anymore. As for himself, however, he had outgrown the island and was almost aching for a chance to finally go out to sea. Luffy wasn't ready to leave just yet, but Ace knew that he had been. It had been one of the hardest things he had to do, leaving Luffy on his own, but he was glad to see that it all worked out in the end. Luffy could take care of himself, and he had his crew there to pick up and keep him from getting killed. He was so relieved that he no longer had to worry about him. "Ace?" Luffy asked, looking a little guilty at that, but Ace just smiled again and ruffled Luffy's hair in an affectionate way. "Not that I would want you any other way," he told him truthfully. "Straw hats. I don't know how much more I can take." Usopp yelled out, lying on the grass and nursing a hurt side as Chopper ran around, trying to tend to the wounds. Everyone was a bit worse for wear after that last fight. It was brutal. Zoro and Sanji took the blunt of the attacks, but with their own moves almost useless against the slime Lucci, it was hardly a fight. This time, the creature lasted so much longer. It was able to hold onto his shape, and was just as deadly as the Lucci they had been watching against Luffy. Their only saving grace was that this Lucci wasn't as fast as the real one. But his claws were deadly, able to give them some deep injuries. The women escaped without injury, and Chopper only had minor cuts and bruises, and Brook had several cracks in his bones. But as for the others, Sanji and Zoro were in the worst shape, both of them bearing deep slashes across their bodies, while Usopp had a slightly burnt side where Lucci had hit him with that flaming finger pistol of his. Frankie had a deep cut across his face, that Chopper was taking care of, while the other two were breathing hard, trying to force their own wounds to heal. "This is bullshit," Sanji roared angrily, hitting the ground in frustration. "I guarantee that if we could touch that bastard, he'd be dead long before now. We were leading it back to the temple, weren't we?" Zoro snapped back, lying on his back and staring up at the sky with an angry look on his face. "What went wrong? It disappeared, didn't it?" Nami asked furiously, as she took over the job of rubbing an ointment on Usopp's side and let Chopper run to Zoro to treat him. "We took too long. Thanks to Robin's abilities, they knew which way they had to go, and they were making good progress in luring Slime Lucci back to the temple. But since they took so long in getting the overgrown cat to come after them, it had disappeared after destroying most of the part of the forest they were stuck in. Burnt and chopped pieces of the trees lay around them like a giant toddler knocked his toys over. Zoro, in his rage, forced himself to get back up and started attack every single tree and rock he could find to vent his frustration. "I've had enough of this place," he yelled out. "I want to just get back on the ship and leave this god-forsaken rock." Everyone was with him on that one. They had enough of this slime monster, and seeing these memories, everything that they had learned so far was taking a toll on them all, both physically and emotionally. All of them wanted nothing more than to just find Luffy and leave. This place was starting to drive them all crazy. "Why don't we just try to keep moving back to the temple?" Frankie asked. "Just be as close as possible or something the next time that it shows up." "Easier said than done," Nami whispered, feeling close to tears after all this, and just wanted to lie down to sleep for a while. "That's what we've been trying to do. And who knows who we could be fighting next? What if it looks like that giant we fought at Thriller Bark? I don't want to even think about it." "Ah," Chopper screamed, thinking of that zombie giant. "You really think so? If it is, then I sure don't want to be around to see it." Usopp cried out, sitting bolt upright, the pain in his side already gone. "Which is why we need to think of some kind of plan." Nami answered firmly. "Screw the monster. I say we head back to that hole in the ground, find Luffy, and just leave." "It's our fault that thing is loose though," Sanji interrupted. "Technically, it was Luffy's fault, but still. Ace said that he couldn't let Luffy come back until that thing is dealt with," Zoro added darkly. Everyone was tired and frustrated, but what else could they do? If they couldn't even touch the enemy, how were they to beat it? "It has to have some kind of weakness," Brook pointed out. "Remember Eneru and Crocodile? They both had weaknesses even though they seemed invincible." "Yes, but they were also part of this world," Robin added tiredly, "whereas this thing isn't." "You know," Frankie asked miserably, "I really do hate this island. I can't wait until we get out of here." He sighed as he thought over everything they learned about this place. Apparently you could meet up with people you loved who died. A part of him had been holding on to the hope of seeing Tom again, just once more, but after all this, he wasn't sure if that was a good idea. Would it be possible for that slimy thing to end up taking Tom's form? If he had, he didn't know what he would do. Robin was looking at him sadly, and she could tell from the look on his face just what he was thinking of. She took a chance and asked him, also thinking that everyone could use a change of subject, "What did you mean when you said that it was Spandam's fault that your master was taken away?" When she saw Frankie freezing, she added, "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to." Frankie sighed as he laid back and stared up through the trees to the sky, feeling everyone's eyes on him. "It's not exactly something I like to think about," he confessed. "But, in those days I really liked to build these dangerous battleships. Now, I don't know how he did it, but Spanda somehow convinced the world government to revive the ancient weapons and use them to put a stop to the age of pirates. Personally, I think he only said that so that he could get rid of the government and rule the world himself. Now there's a terrifying future," Robin said bitterly as Chopper bandaged up a wound in Zoro's leg, giving him threats to keep the wrappings on or else he'd give him a real injury to worry about. "Tell me about it," Frankie said bitterly. "I don't know how he found out, but he learned that Tom had the blueprints before me and Iceberg did. He came to Water 7 and tried to blackmail him into giving them up. But I'm guessing that Tom refused." Sanji asked knowingly. "He had a lot of balls, I'm guessing. More than the whole world government put together," Frankie laughed. "Not that that's saying much. The whole lot of them are murdering bastards. But that's not the point. Yeah, Tom refused. He was going to stand trial for building the Oro Jackson, the old pirate king's ship, and be charged for it. They couldn't do that though," Nami said quickly. "I mean, it's not like he was part of Roger's crew, right? They couldn't." But she stopped when she remembered that they could have. "Anyone who had any connection with Roger was, and still is, considered a criminal," Robin answered, handing Chopper more bandages. "Even if he wasn't a pirate himself, the fact that he helped Roger could have gotten him into a lot of trouble." "But Tom was smart," Frankie said, sitting up. "See, he told them about his plans to build the sea train and that it would take about 10 years. So, they decided to postpone the trial until then. And if Tom managed to keep his end of the promise, they'd let him go. But the sea train did get finished," Usopp pointed out, "so. It was Spanda," Frankie growled, punching the ground angrily. "On the day of the trial, he framed Tom by using my battleships on the judiciary ship, making it look like that we were behind the whole thing. Why doesn't that surprise me?" Robin asked, her voice bitter. "All to get the blueprints right." "Yeah," Frankie growled, turning away from them so that his massive back was to them all. "Tom used his ticket of the sea train to get me and Iceberg out of trouble. But he was taken away. Before he did though, Tom passed the blueprints to us. So Spanda never got his filthy hands on them." "I'm so sorry, Frankie," Nami whispered as Brook began to sob at that. "What a brave man," Brook cried, wiping his eyes with his boa. "A true man. And don't you forget that," Frankie sighed. I tried to stop them, to get Tom back. But they ended up running me over with the puffing Tom. I was dying, and I ended up having to replace my body parts with metal to survive. And that's how you became a cyborg. Usopp gasped in understanding. Thinking back, it was stupid, Frankie admitted. I wanted to save Tom. But I was just too weak. Getting yourself killed wouldn't have been any way of repaying him back for all that he did for you, thought. Zoro pointed out, and Frankie lowered his head a little further as he thought that over. But, you survived. I'm sure that Tom would be relieved just for that. Maybe, Frankie said as he thought back. But he wondered, if he had this kind of strength that day, could he have saved Tom? Still, what a bastard that Spanda. I don't think that the world government would have been happy with him for killing 10,000 of their soldiers. And if they found out about his plans, he's a dead man. Well, I sure won't be shedding any tears for him, said Robin as she put a comforting hand on Frankie's bulky shoulder. Nor will I, Brooke said, taking several deep breaths. Seeing how upset that Frankie was, he wanted to change the subject from his master for a moment and instead asked them to finish telling him about the rest of their battles with CP9. How they left off by telling him about how Chopper beat Kumadori. Well, Nami said, thinking back. While that was happening, I was fighting Khalifa. And I told you before that she ate the bubble fruit. She could drain your strength with the bubbles she created. And if she touched you, she could turn you into a kind of slippery doll. It was a nightmare. I couldn't even stand up or hold my clean attack thanks to her. But while I was fighting, Chopper came bursting in through the wall in his monster form and through the bathtub downstairs. Oh, so that's what happened, Sanji said as he thought back to when he saw the tub fall and splash him with water. Sorry, Chopper whispered, lowering his head in shame. Don't be, Nami smiled kindly at him. I mean, I was shocked and everything, but thanks to you I was able to figure out her weakness. Just like with all bubbles, it washes off with water. So I made it rain inside. After I was back to normal, I created a few mirages to confuse her and finished her off with a Thunder Lance attack. That's so brave of you. Sanji sighed happily, hearts back in his eyes as he looked at her. Better than you were, Nami told him coldly. What were you thinking just letting her beat you up like that? I couldn't help it, Sanji said. Even if she was their enemy, Khalifa was still a beautiful lady. I take it that your weapon was improved then? Brooke asked her as Sanji sulked on the ground. Yep, Nami smiled, going for the clean attack she worked on for 2 years and looked at it proudly. Gone are the days that it was just a party trick toy. See, before we got to Water 7, Usopp worked on it by adding dials to make it the perfect clean attack. It helped me to control the weather a lot easier and new tricks like making mirages in the mist and all that. And to think there was a time you couldn't even take on Buggy, Chopper chirped up with a little laugh. I bet that I could take him now, Nami said firmly, putting it back to the holder at her side. After you beat her, then what? Brooke asked curiously. Well, I ended up finding the number 2 key and we went to give that to these morons and to stop Chopper, Nami answered. Chopper ended up running into our fight, Zoro said as Chopper looked at him in surprise. I did, he asked. Yeah, I remember, Frankie said, finally looking back at them. After you beat that CP9 guy, you ended up climbing up the side of the tower and broke in on the women fighting. After that, you went to where these guys, he jerked his thumb to Zoro and Usopp. That latter quickly looked away before Chopper could realize what he said, and we worked out a plan to snap you out of it. So you knocked me into the ocean, Chopper nodded in understanding. Well, that would explain how he returned to normal. Nami gave me one of the keys, and along with the one I got from that Chipapa guy, I fished you out and went running after Luffy, Frankie said. While you were doing that, I unlocked the cuffs that they had, Nami said, still giving the two of them sharp looks for being that dumb in the first place. Zoro added that he fought Kaku while Sniper King tried to fight Jabra, but Mr. Nosebleed was more than happy to take him on by that point. They saw the gates of justice opening and they realized that they were running out of time. But man, that wolf had to be an even worse liar than Usopp, Sanji said, running his hand irritably through his hair. I mean, Robin was his long-lost sister. Give me a break. Hey, my lies are amazing, Usopp retorted. Anyway, Sanji said, long story short, I busted out Diable Hambi. And gave that wolf a taste of my foot. How does that work? Robin asked curiously, wondering how he was able to burst into flames like that. Delighted you asked, my dear, he sighed happily. See, my legs are so strong, that when I start spinning at high speeds, I heat them up thanks to friction and that's when I kick ass. Of course, he also knew that if he used it too often, it could hurt him. He suddenly understood why Luffy used his second gear, a really powerful ability, but it could be dangerous after too long. Anyway, I kicked his ass and took the key by sending him all the way to the ground floor. You're so awesome, Sanji. Chopper said, his eyes sparkling at how cool his friends all were. It was probably just luck, Zoro said as Sanji glared at him. Did you say something, Moss Head? He demanded. Guess your hearing is messed up too, Zoro taunted. I ought to kill you, he snarled. Enough, Nami sighed, really sick of all the fighting between these two. Why don't you tell us about your fight, Zoro? Don't know what you want to hear, Zoro said, remembering the pain in the ass that Kaku was when he fought him. The guy never shut up. I used Asura to beat him in the end, no big deal. Yeah, I probably could have taken him out a whole lot easier than you could, Sanji said, and Zoro shrugged. So did you want to be buried in that suit, or something decent? He asked, annoyed. Keep digging your grave, Moss head, Sanji hissed. But how do you do that? Chopper asked, remembering when he saw that technique. 3 heads and 6 arms. I don't see how. I guess I got angry, Zoro answered coolly. It's all about fighting spirit. I don't know how else to describe it. Interesting, Brook said, folding his arms and thinking it all over. It seems that aside from Robin-san, you each developed new special abilities or weapons. Luffy-san with his 2nd and 3rd gears, Zoro-san develops Asura. Sanji with Diable Hambi, Chopper utilizes Monster Point, Nami counted off, seeing what he was talking about. While you and Usopp both have new weapons, Robin finished off. They all looked at each other as they thought that through. Looks like we all owe that battle at Enies lobby for getting stronger, Zoro stated, leaning back against the tree. Who knew? How did you get the Kabuto anyway, Usopp? Chopper asked curiously. I thought that Sniper King had it. I invented it, but I let Sniper King use it, he said quickly. Yeah, see, he left his ultra cool weapon at, he was getting it repaired after a big battle against 10 giant sea kings. So, he needed something befitting a real warrior. So I made it for him. Really? Chopper asked, his eyes bright once more. That's so awesome, Usopp. Of course it is. Usopp bragged, feeling his confidence grow. No one else said anything. They just decided to let these two talk it out and pretend that they couldn't hear him. If Chopper wanted to believe him, who were they to stop him? But as Usopp went on to brag, Zoro suddenly thought of something and he turned back to Robin. You said you knew something about CP9. He asked and she blinked. Right, I did say that I would tell you, she said, thinking it over, and they all looked at her. Like I said before, it's just a rumor. But after the Enies lobby was destroyed, Spandam was admitted into the government intensive care unit at a hospital. She smiled darkly at that, truly satisfied, and was silently hoping that he was in a lot of pain. But told everyone that it was the other members of CP9 who let the island burn down and all of us escape. So they began hunting around for them in the remains of the island. No one could have survived if they stayed on that island though, Chopper pointed out. There wasn't anything left by the time we escaped. Oh, I think that they survived, Zoro said, and he dully told them all what he saw before they dove for the sea. How he saw Bluno use his powers to drag Lucci through the door and how he saw other members of CP9 there. Robin said, nodding softly, yes, that would explain it. Even though they were all injured, I don't think it would have been impossible for them to survive. I don't understand everything about the Door fruit, but I do know that I heard a rumor that Lucci was admitted to a hospital at St. Poplar a few days after the incident. What? Usopp cried out in fear, you mean he's still alive? How were they able to escape the island though? Nami gasped at her, the thought of seeing that guy somewhere on the Grand Line again made her feel ill. He was bound to be much stronger than before, and they were barely able to fight a copy of that freak. Again, only rumors, Robin confessed as Chopper and Brooke screamed at the thought. But she looked to Frankie and asked, however, am I right in guessing that this street Poplar is connected by the railway? Hey yeah, Frankie said, thinking it all over. I get it. If they survived the bombardment with Bluno, all they had to do was wait until the coast was clear and they could have just walked along the tracks or something all the way to St. Poplar. Or maybe they snuck on board a marine ship. I don't know. But after seeing all this, I know that those guys can take care of themselves. Apparently, from what I heard, Lucci was unconscious, or maybe even comatose, when he was admitted into the hospital, Robin continued as she thought back to what she heard. While she was with the revolutionaries, she heard many rumors about them and the government dealing with the destruction of Enies lobby. When she heard that Spandam blamed CP9 for everything, she had been curious to hear what happened to them, and if they should worry about a possible revenge they could be plotting for her and her crew. And since they couldn't go to the world government for help since Spandam pretty much stabbed them in the back, they became fugitives. I can't say for sure exactly what happened, but I think that Frankie's right and they might have just walked along the tracks to one of the nearby islands. Since they couldn't go back to Water 7, it was all they could do. And I doubt that it was just Lucci who needed help, Zoro commented, thinking of how he sliced Kaku up. They're resourceful, I'll say that much for them, Nami added grimly, resting her cheek against her hand. But I'm surprised that the rest of CP9 seemed to care about Lucci. They're all cold-blooded assassins. But they took him to a hospital and everything. I think that they genuinely care for each other's well-being, Brooke said, thinking it all over. After all they went through together, I think that it's only natural even if they don't show it. Not only that, but they were on their own after all. They needed each other if they were going to survive. I also heard that a group of pirates attacked the town days later and several strong fighters took them out easily, Robin went on, but these fighters were so brutal that the townspeople were terrified of them as well. From what I found out, they took the pirates' ship and left after that. The last that they were seen however was when they were fighting off some Marines on an island before they took the battleship and just disappeared. That was just before the war 2 years ago. Disappeared? Sanji asked cautiously. You don't know where they are or what they've been up to. Or if they're still fugitives, or alive even. Oh, I doubt that they're dead, Zoro said grimly, they're tough bastards. They won't die easily. Which means there's always the chance that they could come after us again. Usopp cried out in panic, terror going through him at the idea. Really? Chopper screamed in fear. Don't worry, Zoro said firmly, his hands on his swords, I'm sure that we'll be able to take them out again. I don't know what's been happening to them since then, but I do know that they made Spandam their enemy, Robin finished, feeling truly gratified at that thought. There were several officers inside the Marines who were passing information to the revolutionaries and she heard the whole story. Apparently when he was put into the hospital, they contacted him through a transponder snail and promised that they would come for him very soon. I almost feel bad for the guy, Frankie smirked at the idea of how freaked out that Spandam must have been when he heard the news. Damn, he wished that he could have seen the look on his face when he got that call. He's so screwed. He deserves it, Robin said firmly, not at all sympathetic. But if the former agents of CP9 are still alive, they've been stepping very lightly ever since. It was Spandam's fault for blaming the whole thing on them, Sanji shrugged. Just desserts if you ask me. After seeing all this, I am truly humbled by what I witnessed, Brook said regretfully. I only wish that I too was part of the battle. Don't worry about it, Nami said kindly, if I remember correctly, it wasn't too long after this did we meet up with you. Brook looked up eagerly. You mean it? I will finally be in the memories at long last. Oh, I cannot wait to see my entrance. Yo-ho-ho-ho. Taking on Enies lobby is something I won't ever forget though, Frankie smirked as he thought back to that day, it was something that he was sure Tom would have done. In fact, it's something I take great pride in. But just as they were starting to really recover from their encounter with Slime Lucci, the island faded around them so that they were back on the Mary. It was the most perfect day, the sun was out, and their gentle clouds drifting across the sky. Aside from the slight chill in the air, it was the perfect sailing weather, in fact, it was almost as if Enies lobby never happened. Everyone however was resting on the deck, most of them already bandaged up and wandering around the ship. Especially Luffy and Chopper. With Luffy still unable to walk, he was being carried on Chopper's shoulders as they went around looking for Usopp. Hey, Usopp, Luffy called, not seeing Sniper King, with his mask back on and looking away from them all. But, Brook whispered, not understanding. Sanji rolled his eyes. Those two morons, how is it that Luffy could think that his atrocity of a wanted poster looked just like him, but he couldn't see through a stinkin' mask? Seriously, what was with these two? His past self gave Sniper King a dark look, as if he just wanted him to grow up, as Luffy and Chopper asked him if he knew where Usopp was. As if he got an electric shock, he jumped up and cleared his throat as he said, please relax, he already went ahead on a smaller ship. At his words, Memory Sanji gave him a hard kick to the head, before hissing something into his ear. Not that the other two paid much attention to that. But why? Chopper exclaimed in shock. That doesn't make sense, the Mary's his ship right? Luffy said in confusion. Should we tell them? Brook whispered to Robin, who shook her head with a fond smile. Don't worry, I think that it's best that we don't let them catch on. That's just how Luffy is. He's very straightforward about what he wants to be and how he feels, since he acts and says what he wants to do rather than think it. It was funny, Luffy can identify similarities on things that have little resemblance, but is unable to see similarities with things with obvious connections. And she chuckled a little as she thought about Foxy's pathetic disguises and how he had fooled him so completely. That's too bad, Chopper sighed, I wanted to talk to you, Usopp. How did you leave so quickly though? Usopp looked nervous as the others felt a little sweat drop around their heads. As Usopp struggled to find a way to explain, Memory Nami shut the door to the lower deck and walked right back up to the mast and told them all. I checked everywhere, she said, looks like we're the only ones on the ship. With her talking, it distracted Chopper completely, and Usopp sighed in relief at that. That's pretty strange, past Sanji said, having lit up another cigarette, which current Sanji sighed in longing for. The Mary didn't sail itself here right? Past Nami asked them puzzled. Of course not, Memory Zoro said, someone was calling us, the whole crew heard it. Yeah, but who expected Mary to actually start? Current Sanji stated, before his voice died in his throat. And you don't know who it was? Kokura asked them all in surprise. No, Robin answered as she petted Gonbi from where she leaned against the railing, just a voice beckoning us to the sea. Come on guys, the answer here is obvious. Luffy said loudly, I'm telling you that was Mary's voice we heard. Yeah, it really wasn't it. Nami asked, her eyes saddening. She never would have believed it if she didn't hear it herself. Poor Mary, if they only knew. Huh, Memory Chopper cried out in shock, you think so? Mary, Luffy called to the sheep's head, come on. Say something else. I think we'd know by now if the ship can talk, past Zoro pointed out. That's because Klabottermen don't show themselves unless they're reaching the end of their lives, Frankie sighed. I'm not surprised she hadn't said anything before now. He smiled as he added, but she didn't need to. I'm sure that she must have been perfectly happy with all of you. What I can't figure out though, was how she was able to fight her way through Aqua Laguna. Those waves should have smashed her apart. You're forgetting who her captain is, Robin reminded him gently. You saw how hard he fights through no matter the odds. But I think that those waves were too much for her, in the end. Mary, Usopp whispered, knowing what was about to come, but he sucked it up and forced himself to watch as Memory Nami leaned back against the mast before she rested her cheek in her hand. You know, as ridiculous as it may sound, she whispered, I was thinking the same thing. At her words, they all turned to look at Mary's bow, each one with a strange look on their face, before she added, but there's no way, right? That's impossible. Boy was I wrong, Nami whispered as she reached out to touch the mast herself, her hand sadly going right through it. Each one of them suddenly wished that they could reach out and touch their old ship just one more time. Or in Brook's case, the first time. For the longest time, no one was able to say anything, either from the past or present. They just kept to themselves, lost in their own thoughts until Luffy pointed ahead. Hey look, he called. There's a ship coming. What? Sniper King cried out, jumping to his feet anxiously, looking ready to reach for his weapon. Who is it? They all looked up and all thoughts of fear or anxiety faded when they saw who it was. Probably the biggest ship they've seen in these memories yet, was a Galila Company ship, and what looked like half of Water 7 on board. At the sight of them, they all began to cheer and scream out in joy, and in the front was none other than Iceberg. Oh, my! Brook called ecstatically. They came to meet you. Yeah, and just in time too, Zoro said, his eyes grim, and his head bowed a little, readying himself for what was about to happen. But their past selves were oblivious as to what was about to happen. They were all smiling and laughing when they saw the ship, waving eagerly at them. Ahoy! Luffy cheered, when he saw Iceberg, still looking beat up but much better than he had before. What's up, Ice Pops? Ice for brains, huh? Past Frankie asked before he smirked. The current one did the same. Though he was a pain in the ass most days, he truly would have been heartbroken if Ice for Brains ended up kicking the bucket. If he died, then Water 7 would be dead in the water without him around to keep things from falling apart. He also noticed the way that his old friend was looking at Robin, as if he was trying to make up his mind about her. Finally, he smiled, as if he just couldn't believe what he was seeing. Everything seemed so perfect, but then they heard a terrible creaking sound beneath their feet. And before they knew it, the Mary's deck gave out. There was a horrible snapping noise and the entire front of the ship broke in half, Mary's bow falling almost to the water and they could see directly below deck. Though none of them were hurt, everyone was forced to hang onto what was left of the ship to keep them from going into the water. What happened? Brook gasped in shock. He didn't understand, they were almost there. They had come all this way just for Mary to fall apart now. The rest of them were all prepared for seeing this again, but it wasn't any easier. All of them felt as if they were being punched in the gut, some of them even fighting tears. Mary! Gasped Sniper King as he stared at the cracking boards. Why is it falling apart all of a sudden? Memory Zoro cried out, forced to hold onto the railing to keep himself from slipping. There's nothing sudden about it, Past Sanji said, a painful bitterness in his tone as he seemed to come to understanding to what was happening. We all knew this was inevitable. Luffy looked up at him as he finished, they told us right. Before we left they told us Mary was unfit to sail. No, Brook whispered in horror as Luffy stared back at him, clearly trying to think of a way out of this mess. Memory Nami was the only one still on the main deck, and was staring in shock at all the damage below them. What happened to you, Mary? She gasped as water slowly began to fill inside. At this rate, it wouldn't be long before she sank. You've got to get off there, Brook croaked out, but the idea of leaving such a dear friend behind made him feel sick to his stomach, though he was a skeleton. But he didn't dare joke around after all this. Finding some new of his regaining strength, Luffy forced his tired body upright and staggered to Mary's head so that he could talk to Iceberg. Though they could see it in his face that he already knew the answer, he continued to yell desperately to them all, Ice Pop's help. Mary's in trouble. Can't you do something? You got here just in time. You're all shipwrights, aren't you? I'm begging you, don't let her die now. Mary's not just a ship, she's a member of our crew. If it wasn't for her, we all would have died out there. So come on, do something. They all looked away, unable to hear any more of Luffy's pleas. They all knew the truth, they knew that there wasn't anything else that could be done here. But it was still horrible, like being told that someone you loved was dying and there wasn't anything they could do. Usopp was already crying, and the more sensitive ones weren't far behind in shedding tears. Iceberg didn't say anything for a moment as he looked at them all, but there was a different kind of understanding in his eyes as well. Unlike before, it seemed as though he could finally see why they were so upset when they told them that Mary was done for. She's fought hard for you, he finally answered in a strangely gentle voice, but it's time to let her rest. Luffy's eyes widened in shock as Iceberg closed his eyes. Besides, he added grimly, I've already done everything that I can. Done, all that you can. Memory Nami called in confusion as the news was sinking in. Iceberg sighed as he told them what happened after they left Water 7 on Rocketman. He heard hammering from Scrap Island, and when he went to look, he had found the Mary lying there. Aqua Laguna nearly smashed it to pieces as it lay there, but he told them that it was as if there was a voice begging for help, asking for him to repair her so that she could sail one last time. He admitted that he didn't know why he did it, only that he had to do so. He patched her up as best as he could before he left. But as he did, he could have sworn he heard the Mary thank him, and when he turned back, he saw her slowly turn on the next wave that came in and watched her sail out to sea all on her own. Amazing, Brook whispered as Iceberg finished his story. There was really no other way that he could even begin to describe it. He soon followed after Usopp in tears, fully appreciative of their devotion to this one-of-a-kind ship. Sunny sure has a lot to live up to, Frankie said softly. Sad as he was to say it, he knew that even if the shipwrights could repair her good as new, Merky never would have been able to last for long any further in the Grand Line. The ships all in the New World were built to last, this little ship. It was a miracle that she was able to make it even this far in the shape she was in. But he had a feeling that Mary might have already known that she couldn't have gone any farther, but she wanted to see her crew all together and safe just one last time. He knew it wasn't much, but he hoped that she was able to die in peace after fulfilling her last mission. Iceberg finally looked back up and stared at the Mary in wonder. This is a miracle, he said, voicing what they all thought. There's no other word for it. A miracle of a ship that's gone past its limits, to see you all one last time. He gazed down at everyone's amazed faces as he told them truthfully, as you know, I've been a shipwright for many years, but I've never seen a ship as incredible as this one. It's lived a wonderful life. I truly believe that, Brook told them all. How could she? Usopp asked quietly, tears still burning his eyes. After all that we did to her. Maybe, Frankie sighed, but she must have been happy. Why else would she do all this for us? Luffy stared up at Iceberg for the longest time. He leaned back on his feet, his hands curling into tight fists before he whispered softly, I understand. The others stared at the back of his head, each one with mixed reactions, but all of them with grief and acceptance. They all knew there was nothing else that could be done, the best that they could do for poor Mary was to put her out of her suffering. Not a single one of them said a word as Galila lowered a long rowboat for them all. They all silently left the Mary, some of them lingering for several long seconds before they climbed in, and moved away. Luffy was the only one left on board. He had asked for a flaming torch, saying that they were going to give the Mary a proper funeral at sea. The present-day Straw Hats stepped off as well, standing on the water, and moved back to stand with their past selves. As for Brook, he felt truly honored that he got to witness this even if it was 2 years overdue. At long last Luffy stepped into a tiny rowboat that they sent down, and he stood there with the torch in his hands for a few minutes, gazing sadly up at Mary. Well, guys, you ready? He asked his crew behind them. Not a single one of them disagreed, not. Luffy then held up the torch. Mary, I know the floor of the sea is a dark and lonely place. But don't worry, we're here to see you off. Chopper nodded miserably. He couldn't stand the thought of Mary spending forever all alone at the bottom of the ocean. He sniffled a little as he began to cry, but he forced himself to keep looking as Luffy touched the ship's side with the fire. I'm sure you wish he was here, Luffy went on, but it's probably best if Usopp isn't around. I don't know if he can take this. Since you missed it the first time, are you okay, Usopp? Chopper asked him, glancing up at his crying face. Usopp looked away. He knew all along. He knew that she couldn't be saved, not for all the berries in the world. She carried them all the way from the East Blue though. She sailed through everything that the Grand Line had to throw at them. No matter what happened, she just kept on going no matter what happened, and kept them safe. Didn't that count for something? He did his best to keep her alive, and was in denial over what he knew was bound to happen. She was a gift from a dear friend, and sometimes at night he would sit up and wonder what Kaya would think if she knew just how rough they had been with the Mary since they left home. How amazed she would be about the adventures and places they'd been to. All she had to do was look at all the scars on the ship and know that each story he told was true, though he knew that she didn't need proof to believe in him. And the Mary herself had repaired her own battered body just so that she could carry them a little longer, wanted to make sure that we were somewhere that would help them get another ship. Ever since that night in Skypia, he truly believed that he had seen Mary's spirit. She appeared before him and reassured them that everything was going to be okay, and when Frankie confirmed it for him, he knew that he hadn't been dreaming or anything. And now, seeing the ship burn, but it wasn't as painful as he thought it would be been. Since he left the crew, he realized that he wasn't as useless as he first thought. And that everyone truly did love the Mary, but there were just some things that had to be done. At least this way, Mary didn't have to suffer anymore. But his throat closed up to speak. Usopp only nodded at Chopper as he began to cry a flood of tears, even forcing a watery smile as he watched. Their captain held the torch to Mary's broken side for a few seconds before it spread and soon the whole ship was burning. Everyone watched with their hearts feeling as if they were being crushed. Luffy held his hand to a part of the ship that wasn't burning, holding it there for the last time before he pushed himself away, his little boat drifting towards them. Though most would never understand, though most wouldn't see why they were crying over a ship that could no longer sail, all you had to do was sail with her and you would understand. They loved Mary, and no matter what anyone said, they all knew that she was a part of their crew. "Thank you for carrying us for so long, and for so far, Mary," they heard Luffy whisper as soon, the entire ship was engulfed in flames. But despite the heat it was creating, they all suddenly felt cold. That was when the clouds right overhead seemed to be mourning with them, for a gentle snow began to fall around them. "Snow," Memory Nami whispered as she raised a hand so that a single snowflake landed in her palm. As they looked at the bit of snow, memories suddenly began to go through their minds. They remembered when Kaya first gave them the Mary, and how the first 4 straw hats toasted their crew in the ship. How Nami had always told them off for doing something stupid, or breaking a part of Mary when she wasn't watching them, or when Luffy first fired off the cannon before Usopp came running over and showed them all how to really fire it. That was when he officially became their sniper. Memory Nami stared at the ship with wide eyes, as if she had just realized what they were truly losing, and tears fell thick and fast. The current Nami had already had a head start, and leaned against Robin for support. Robin merely held her tight, as sparkles of tears were forming there as well. Neither one of the Zoros said a word as they watched the ship now completely engulfed in the blaze. The current one had never been much for sentimentality, but he was grateful for all that Mary went through for them. As if from another life, he remembered all the arguments and fights that they had gotten into since they set sail. He especially remembered that day when they left Loungetown and spotted the lighthouse showing them the way to the Grand Line. How they each made their vow on that barrel. "I'm going to the Grand Line to find the All Blue. I'm gonna be king of the pirates. The world's best swordsman. I'm going so that I can draw a map of the entire world. I'm going to become a brave warrior of the sea. And now, to the Grand Line." He shut his eyes and nodded his head respectfully, and gave her a private, "Thank you, for saving their hides one last time." Sanji was also the only other one who wasn't crying, but his head was also full of memories. Like that fateful journey up Reverse Mountain and touching the sky before they went crashing down. How they went zooming down the other side where they could see the other side in their first glimpse of the most dangerous sea in the world. He had to fight a laugh as he also thought of their misadventure into the calm belt and were almost eaten by all those sea kings. Yeah, she sure lived one hell of a life. Usopp had to fight to stay on his feet. But really, all he wanted to do was fall down and sob his heart out. They went everywhere on that ship. She was their home. They sailed with Vivi and Karu on it. Almost died by that giant dolphin, or by that cyclone after Nami got sick. He remembered where he went to Little Garden and learned about the warriors of Elbaf, how he made a vow to go to such a place someday. And one of his most important memories of where Masters Dory and Bragi gave them a send-off and saved them from that island eater. He could never forget that moment of soaring through the sky and marveling at such strength. "Thank you, Mary," he cried out as Brooke placed a kind hand on his shoulder. Robin gave a grateful smile as she looked at the Mary, the first real home she had for 20 years. It was all because she saw it in the desert, giving her a tiny ray of hope before she snuck on board. Ever since then, it was one happy day after another, such as the journey up the Nock upstream to Sky Island. She shed her tears as he hugged Nami to her. But she could never forget Mary and how much she meant to them all. Chopper was bawling on Frankie's shoulder as the cyborg wept into his handkerchief. He loved the Mary. She was the ship that he left Drum Island on. She became the home that housed him and his friends. They went to so many places on her. He remembered when they said goodbye to Canis and Pagaya, the fear they all felt when they fell from the sky, before they were saved by that octopus. That had been an amazing day, to float across the sky, before their hard landing. He was unable to stop crying, rubbing his eyes as hard as his past self cried next to him. They stared at the burning ship, never turning away as the fire spread and the mast fell over for the last time, and their flag breaking free and fluttered off in the wind like a leaf. At that moment, they heard it once again. A sad voice speaking, as if across the water and echoing slightly in their ears. This voice was so sad that it felt like their hearts were breaking as she said 2 words, "I'm sorry." They all stared as they realized that the sheep's head was crying. Truly crying, with the liquid falling from her painted eyes. "I wanted to carry everyone a little bit further," Mary told them all, but her tears were different from theirs. She was crying because she wouldn't be able to go with them any further, not because of her death. "I had so much fun, I wish our adventures would never end." "Mary," current Nami cried out tearfully. "Mary." Past Chopper screamed out loudly as Memory Nami fell to her knees and cried. The shipwrights in the ship were trying to figure out where the voice was coming from, but Iceberg kept his eyes firmly on the burning ship, never once turning away from her. The present-day Straw Hats weren't faring any better than their past selves. More than anything, they felt as if their hearts were being pulled out at the thought of Mary apologizing to them. "But I'm sorry Mary went on before Luffy yelled out, unable to take it anymore. "No Mary." He shouted out, and he was also crying like the rest of them, "If anyone should apologize, it's us. Not you. I'm no good at steering. I ran you into icebergs and all kinds of stuff. I took bad care of you and ripped your sails." His words only seemed to sum up just how terrible they had treated Mary all this time. Zoro and Sanji are idiots too. They were breaking your stuff all the time. Usopp tried to fix you but he wasn't any good at it. We all know that. Luffy cried out before he screamed, if anyone's sorry it's us. He fell to his knees in the little boat, not even trying to hide his tears or how he felt about this whole mess. But there was someone who felt that they didn't need to apologize to her. I don't mind, Mary said gently as they all stared at her, burning her image into their minds and her words engraved in their hearts. I was happy, she told them, and it was as if they could detect traces of a smile in her words. I know you always treated me with love. Thank you. Even if the time we spent together was short, I'm glad that I could spend it with you. Mary. Frankie sobbed out with Brooke, their hearts breaking. We love you. I'm so honored that I got to ride someone as super as you, Mary. Frankie cried a flood, hiding his face in his giant hands. And I wish that we could have met in real life, Lam Chan. Brooke sobbed as water filled his empty sockets. No one else could say a word as they all stood together, watching the last of Mary disappear into the fire. Her eyes were the last thing that they could see, before the fire took them too. Luffy then reared back his head, and screamed out to the heavens, as if he thought she could hear him, MMMMEERRRRRRRYYYYYYYYYYYYYYYYY. And they were grateful when the memory faded. They sat down on the ground, all of them feeling more tired than they had been all evening. A few of them were still sniffling at the sight of seeing Mary's final moments. Mary, she was one of a kind, Sanji said softly. Such a beautiful ship. Frankie sobbed like a baby. That really pulls at your heart. All she wanted was to stay with all of you. Wah hhhhhh. And he broke down all over again. Yes, I don't ever remember seeing a more amazing ship, Brooke whispered as everyone smiled a little. He then thought of the Sunny and asked, do you think that Lion Chan is also alive in there? They all looked at each other, never really thinking about it. All ships have a soul of their own in a certain way, Frankie blubbered. But to be able to act and think on its own, that's rare. Until I met you guys, I always thought it was just an old fairy tale. But after seeing all this, I hope that Sunny really has. Like I said, she's got a lot to live up. But she carries Mary's will. She's her living legacy and she'll make all of you guys just as proud as Mary did. I'm sure she will, Zoro said, a faint smile on his mouth as the crying calmed down, and they were able to dry their eyes. They sat there for a long time, each one of them thinking about how brave Mary had been, and each saying a silent prayer for her spirit. It was a while yet before Brooke, sniffling a little and drying his face, did he finally ask, but what happened to you all? I mean, after Lam Chan's funeral. What is wrong with you not being able to get ship names right? Frankie hissed, hiccuping a little. Not much else happened, Nami said, her spirits feeling low at the moment. Once Mary was gone, they pulled us all on the ship and we went back to Water 7. We were all half dead on our feet by the time we got back. But they let us stay in one of their company housing buildings. Luffy had pretty much passed out by the time we got there and they had to carry him there. I'm not surprised, Robin said, thinking and worry over everyone's injuries. I took care of it all. Chopper said proudly. Once I took care of everyone here and after a quick nap, I went to go treat the Frankie family's wounds and make sure that they didn't have anything serious. Thank goodness then, Brooke said in relief. After several more long minutes, the memory appeared. At first there was nothing but darkness around them. But before they could really begin to wonder about it, they heard a familiar voice shouting out through the void, rise and shine. And a second later, there was so much bright light that it momentarily blinded them. What the hell? Sanji roared, covering his eyes, and blinking several times to try to make sense of what was going on. There were other cries of pain coming from around them, most of which came from Luffy. The memories around them were blurry and a little off from being asleep for so long. But what got all their attentions was the familiar man standing over Luffy. Though he wore a dog-shaped mask, there was no doubt in their minds who it was. GARP. Usopp and Chopper yelled out in fear at the sight of the man. Right, Sanji winced, I forgot about this. Ow, that hurt. OOOOOWWWWWW. Luffy screamed, who was now on the ground and yelling out in pain as he held onto a large lump on his head where his grandpa had hit him. Now that's mean, Robin said, shaking her head. Using hockey to hit him. I see that Garp hasn't changed a bit since Luffy was a kid, Frankie whispered with a deadpan expression. Still as abusive as ever, Usopp whispered sympathetically, before he noticed that his past self was peeking in through the window. That's right, he had been working for days on his coming back speech, and decided to come and see how they were faring until he heard the noise. Boy, had he been shocked to hear more about Luffy's family. What happened? Memory, Sanji yelled. How could one little punch hurt you so much? You're made of rubber. Why didn't he let us know about hockey here, I wonder? Current, Sanji asked before Nami rolled her eyes. Like he's really going to make things easy for us. She asked, he almost sank the Sunny when we were leaving Water 7, remember? Don't remind me, Frankie said darkly. The Sunny was brand new and that jackass tried to sink her. Wait, what was? Oh, never mind, Brooke sighed, I'm sure that I'll find out soon. Catching on, huh? Robin asked teasingly as Chopper hid behind Usopp. Even if he was Luffy's grandfather, Garp was terrifying. That's because there's no defense against a fist of love, Garp said as he removed his mask so that they could see his face there. Though it looked like a sadistic smile, he truly did seem glad to see Luffy again. You've been getting into a lot of trouble lately, haven't you, Luffy? At his voice, Luffy's head snapped up and started in horror at Garp. For one brief moment, it was as if they were still watching the memories of Luffy as a small child. The look on his face said it all. Not that they blamed him, remembering all the training that Garp put Luffy through as a little kid would be enough to mentally scar someone for life. Gee, Grandpa. Luffy shouted out in terror as everyone stared at the two of them in shock. Finding out that Garp was his grandfather was almost as big as finding out about Dragon, Usopp said quietly. But you weren't here, Usopp. Chopper stated in surprise. Oh, well, I mean when I found out later, he lied quickly. Yeah, but if you think about it, I suppose that we really should have seen it coming, Sanji muttered. I mean, who other than a powerful maniac could be related to him? You know, out of all the people, Dragon's the most intimidating guy I've ever heard of, and we haven't even seen him yet. Chopper gulped. He didn't know the first thing about Dragon, only that he was really strong and that he's the most wanted man in the world. But that only makes him seem all the more scary. From their brief moment that they saw back in the Loungetown memories, he didn't seem to be like Luffy at all. And even then, he couldn't see Dragon's face. Dragon is a man of mystery and secrets, Robin said, until the Marines announced it 2 years ago, no one ever knew where he came from, or knew anything about his past. Well, in that case, there's one thing that father and son don't have in common. Dragon's all about secrets and Luffy can't keep his big mouth shut, Frankie stated as they all nodded. Robin only giggled a little. But truthfully, she had met Dragon several times, and she had to admit, he was more like his son than they realize. Even if it wasn't easy to see. You think that Garp would be less violent after hearing what happened at Enies lobby though, Usopp whispered, I mean, Luffy was still recovering wasn't he? Even I knew that much. I think that he easily would have been able to sleep for a couple more days if Garp didn't wake him up, Chopper said nervously as Luffy quickly the others not to fight with Garp because he had nearly killed him many times when he was a kid. When Garp began to tell Luffy not to make him out like a bad guy, Chopper went on, he was in bad shape. He used up almost all of my medical supplies once we got back. I had to give him all kinds of painkillers and sedatives to help. He had gotten a really high fever too and the eternal injuries he got were some of the worst I've seen. But he made a full recovery, right? Nami asked worriedly. Chopper nodded, but he looked down at his feet. He had almost fully recovered by the time we left Water 7, but you're worried about what happens next time? Robin asked in understanding. Chopper nodded as Garp told them all about the training he put Luffy through when he was a little kid. Yeah, he really did a lot of damage to himself after that fight. But you know something? I'm especially worried about the injuries he got from Thriller Bark, he went on, not noticing how some of the crew seemed to freeze at his words. What injuries? Usopp asked him. I thought that Luffy was in good shape by the time we left. He was, and that's what bothers me, Chopper said with a frown. Before Kuma showed up, I had already started going over and treating him. It was serious and I think that he might have even needed surgery. But I never got the chance. However, after I woke up from that explosion, Luffy was up and perfectly fine. I just can't figure out how it happened. Why question a good thing? Zoro asked, a little stiffly. Sanji, Brooke, and Robin all did their best not to look at him. Aren't you just a little curious about that? Chopper asked him. I mean, I'd been studying medicine for years, and I just can't figure out. Luffy was just fine wasn't he? Don't tempt fate, Zoro said. Would you rather he have stayed in the shape that he was in? Well, no, Chopper said, slightly surprised by his question. But it's all right, Chopper, Robin smiled. Maybe it just wasn't as bad as you thought it was. We all know how fast he heals. Maybe it was just luck that did it. You think so? Nami asked, tilting her head a little at the idea. That's all ancient history anyway, Sanji said with a forced smile, having to speak a little louder than usual to make himself heard over the fact that Garp and Luffy were shouting at each other. We should just count our blessings and move on. Chopper, Usopp, and Frankie all looked convinced, but Nami was frowning a little at them all. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something important here. Like there was some kind of riddle that she didn't know the answer to. But at that moment, Garp had Luffy by the front, looking ready to hit him as the crew panicked over what to do until they found out that they were both asleep. Yep, she said with a little sweat drop around her head. I can definitely see the family resemblance. Let's just make sure that Luffy doesn't become as crazy as Garp in the future, Usopp whispered and she nodded firmly by his side. The arguing was interesting to say the least, as they listened to Garp tell them all about Shanks and how he poisoned Luffy's mind when he was a kid. Funny, Zoro stated, I thought that Luffy wanted to be a pirate even before he met Shanks. True, but it wasn't until after he met Shanks did Luffy decide to become the king of the pirates, Nami reminded him, though you think that he would be a little more grateful to him for saving his grandson's life. Oh, I'm sure he is, Robin smiled. He just doesn't want to admit that he owes a pirate, and an emperor at that, a favor. But as things started to calm down, and they were getting over the shock of Garp's appearance, they heard the sounds of fighting and yells outside. As they all looked out the hole that Garp made for his grand entrance, they spotted Zoro out there, already going to town on the Marines. Great, Sanji called, rolling his eyes, only you Mosshead could get us in trouble with the only Marines who aren't here to kill us, yet. How was I supposed to know? Zoro demanded hotly, I saw them coming to shore and I knew Luffy was still asleep. What would you have done if you were me? Garp was also looking up with an irritated look. What's going on out there? He asked. One of the men who had come with Garp glanced at Zoro and answered, it's the pirate hunter. He seems to be going on some kind of rampage. That's putting it mildly, Usopp whispered, as he watched Memory Zoro slice and dice them. Garp, however, didn't seem to be bothered. Ah, he said, he's from Luffy's crew, huh? He looks pretty tough. He then cracked a smile as he turned to the two young men standing at attention just behind him. Go ahead you two. Give him hell. Is it me, or do those two look familiar? Brook asked, looking at the two. He didn't notice how the others seemed to smile knowingly either. The blonde one pulled out a pair of kukri knives as they went charging at Zoro. Of course, Zoro was more than a match for this guy. They watched calmly as Luffy saw what was going on, and went running after them, yelling at Zoro that they didn't need to fight. But before he could finish, the second guy, this one with pink hair, appeared out of nowhere, kicking him hard in the chin. They're gonna regret that, current Zoro smirked, knowing that if it had been a real fight, those two be dead before they hit the ground. Not even close, Robin said in amusement. A slight trail of blood burst from Luffy's mouth, but he never even broke his stride. Without stopping to take a breath, he glared at the Marine and yelled, hey, what was that for you jerk? But when he threw a punch, the Marine vanished with that shave technique that CP9 used. I can't help but feel like we've seen them before. Brook said, having that nagging feeling at the back of his mind, like a memory he knew was there, but couldn't think of it. We did, Robin said in amusement. Of course, it's been a long while since we've seen them. Brook looked at them in confusion, but the Marine appeared behind Luffy and was running at him. Luffy didn't even turn around before he reached back with an arm and grabbed the front of his shirt before he slammed him to the ground, a fist held over his head. While at the same time, Zoro had the other one on his knees and at sword point. Though the other Marines were shocked by such a display of a fraction of their power, Garp was laughing as he joined them outside. Boys, you're no match at all, he said, sounding as if he didn't expect any other outcome. The boy that Luffy had on the ground was smiling up at him, showing no ill thought at all despite losing. You're as tough as I thought you'd be. That was a nice one, he said as Luffy blinked at him in confusion. The boy laughed as he told him that he gave up. Wish all Marines were that easy to beat, Sanji sighed, but he seemed close to laughing as well. Luffy had slowly gotten to his feet as Memory Zoro resheathed his swords. The two amateur Marines got to their feet and the one with pink hair smiled at Luffy as if they were old friends. Hi Luffy. Hi Zoro, he said as he dusted himself off. It's been a while. Do you know who I am? Why would he say that? Brook asked, hitting his skull with his hand as he tried to figure out why this guy seemed so familiar to him. He certainly didn't remember seeing him before, but everyone else looked as if they were close to laughing. No, Luffy said carefully, voicing what Brook was thinking. Look, it's me, Kobe, he smiled at him as if it was obvious. Kobe, Brook yelled out in shock. You mean that same Kobe that Luffy-san helped to escape from that pirate ship and helped him to find you, Zoro-san? Yep, Zoro smiled. That's him all right. Believe me, I was as surprised as you. I didn't know who he was either at first. My, he certainly grew up from before. Brook said in amazement as Kobe asked Luffy if he remembered him. I never would have recognized him if he never said his name. Don't know what they've been feeding him since he joined them, but whatever he's been having, I say keep it up, Chopper said, still as surprised as he had been when he found out that Luffy was good friends with a Marine. Kobe, huh? Luffy said slowly, not seeing it. Well, I do have a friend named Kobe. But the Kobe I know is a whole lot smaller than you. Sorry. Nope, Kobe smiled, that's the right Kobe. The crybaby, good for nothing, Kobe from before. If there had been any doubt from before, it was long gone. How else could he have known all of that if he wasn't? As for Luffy's reaction, it was just the same as some of theirs when they saw the difference. Memory Zoro stared at him too. Yeah, that's him, he said, disbelief in his tone as well. But why's he on the Grand Line? Now no one could blame them for not seeing it right away. Instead of the pudgy, small, cowardly boy they had seen before who was too scared to leave a ship of pirates, they had this guy. He had grown thinner and taller, almost as tall as Luffy was. He also had a strange cross-shaped scare right above his right eye, and they assumed that it was from Garp's training. His hair had also grown out longer and shaggier than it had been since they last saw him, with his glasses sitting on top of it with a bright neckerchief bandana. He looks like he's been doing good since we last saw him, Robin said with a smile. But talk about a growth spurt. You got to get stronger if you're gonna survive with Garp, Usopp reminded her, shivering a little at some of the memories of what Garp put Luffy through. Man, after seeing all that, no wonder Luffy had to toughen up. He had to just to stay alive. Hey, they volunteered for that, didn't he? Frankie offered, which I give them credit for. Not just anyone will be willing to do all that. Zoro smirked. He knew that Luffy had been a good influence on Kobe. Probably his biggest inspiration to grow stronger and follow his dream. Still, he was impressed with how far they had come in the amount of time he had since they left. He wondered if he had grown tougher in these 2 years. To be honest, Kobe admitted, I'm not a commissioned officer yet. But when I heard that you guys were in the area, I just had to stop by and say hello while I still had the chance. Luffy still gaped at him as Kobe sprang into a salute. If it wasn't for you two, we wouldn't be where we are today. Well, I wouldn't go quite that far, the Marine whom Zoro beaten added as he walked forward. He wore a white shirt with a pale green vest with a rather odd-looking visor over his eyes. There was something familiar about the slightly obnoxious voice. You mean they asked Garp for a favor? Brave men, Frankie muttered, shaking his head. Wait, Brook whispered, staring at the second Marine, if that's Kobe, then, does that mean? A lot of stuff happened, Kobe went on quickly, but long story short, we ended up by being trained by Vice Admiral Garp himself. That must have been hard work. Luffy said excitedly. But man, you grew so much from before. I didn't even recognize you. It's crazy. The Kobe I remember was a pudgy, little dorky guy. He's sure come a long way since then, Sanji admitted. And I suppose Luffy would know better than anyone how hard the work is. Poor bastards. Luffy, Zoro, and Kobe all headed back to the house as Kobe muttered an apology for bothering them when they were clearly still resting. Luffy said to forget about it, that he wanted to talk to him some more. But they had only gone a few yards before the second Marine, near in tears, yelled out, hey you bastards. Wait a second, you didn't recognize me at all, huh? Well, why would I want to? Current Zoro said, still sore about how that jerk tried to have him killed. Those were some of the most miserable weeks of his life. His past self and Luffy both turned to him as his memory self asked in a bored voice, as if he was just humoring him, who the hell are you? It's me, the man said smiling, pointing at himself, see? Me. No, I don't see it, Luffy said bluntly, just tell me. Get a clue guys, he said, removing his sunglasses so that they could see his eyes. It's Helmeppo. Captain Morgan's son, Helmeppo. That guy. Brook cried out, taken aback once again. What's he doing here? Luffy had a long talk with him and Kobe, Nami said, remembering how she had been eavesdropping in on their talk to find out something that they could use to their advantage. And apparently after you and Luffy left they both became chore boys and had to work. Well, that should be good for that spoiled brat, Usopp said, looking sharply at Helmeppo as Nami went on speaking. And apparently, sometime after that, they ended up becoming involved in an escape by Morgan, she explained. You mean that jackass with the axe at the end of his arm? Sanji asked as Chopper's eyes widened at the news. Yeah, Nami nodded, I don't know the whole story, but Garp was there and he took both of them under his wing after they let Morgan escape. Huh, what do you know? Frankie said as he thought it over, guess the old man does have a heart in there after all. How did you know about that anyway, Nami? Chopper asked innocently. Huh, Nami asked before blushing, rubbing the back of her head. Was sorta listening in for any kind of juicy information. Oh, Nami. Sanji swooned, you're so cute when you're being sneaky. That was a private talk though, Brook pointed out. Hey, because of that, I found out that the reason the Marines are able to go through the comm belt thanks to Sea Prism Stone. She defended herself. I only listened in for a little while if you must know. I have heart too. Yeah, one made out stone, Zoro thought to himself darkly. But the whole time, Helmeppo was trying to jog memory Zoro and Luffy's memories. It was funny seeing how clueless the two of them were, actually tilting their heads in confusion at the same time. Really guys, stop giving me such a hard time, Helmeppo said, I made empty threats. Always talking about my daddy. Not exactly something to be proud about pal, Frankie whispered, rolling his eyes. Now, the two of them recognized him. Oh, they both said at the same time, with identical expressions of annoyance on their faces before they said, that guy. What do you mean that guy? Helmeppo demanded angrily. Yeah right, you sucked, Luffy said, no wonder I forgot. Not that he was worth remembering in the first place, Zoro said, shrugging a little as Helmeppo started to cry. I wanted to forgive them, he sobbed, but I just can't. I'm so sorry, Kobe. You just have to accept the past and move on, Helmeppo, Kobe said to him, looking like he was going to laugh. He still sucks, past Zoro said. Looks like it, Luffy agreed. Big baby, current Sanji added. Yo-ho-ho-ho. You are all so harsh. Brook said happily. But at that moment, Kobe turned back to Luffy and asked rather hesitantly, hey Luffy. I know that you and I are enemies now. But are we still, Luffy just smiled back and answered as if it went without saying, of course. We're still friends. Isn't that the sweetest thing? Robin asked with a smile as Kobe beamed back at him. As that was all taken care, Garp ordered his men to repair the wall that he obviously came bursting through. But his men all complained that he had to help since he was the one who destroyed it. His answer was that using the door wouldn't have left much of an impression. Well, he sure left one, Nami stated, shaking her head. Not sure what kind it was though. He scared me, Chopper gulped, remembering how it was like an explosion. Well, what else do you expect from someone Luffy is related to? Sanji asked with a shrug. Though, that does make you wonder about Luffy's mother, Nami whispered, thinking about how she was never mentioned in any of the memories so far. I mean, we don't even know what her name was. And I sure don't remember seeing her. They all looked at each other as the Marines all went to work on fixing the wall. I think, maybe it's best to assume that she died when Luffy was young, Robin answered softly. He was raised with Dayton and the bandits when he was around 7, right? So, well, that isn't any of our business, Zoro reminded them. I think Luffy should have some secrets left to him, don't you all think? Nami nodded at that, remembering her own mother, and wondered if it was a touchy subject for Luffy. Sorry, she said quietly. She was glad when Memory Sanji suddenly asked Luffy, so this grandpa of yours is really famous? Beats me, Luffy said, I never really asked him about his job. Well, he and Ace spent most of their time running from him, so there's not exactly much time for family bonding is there? Frankie pointed out. As Garp hammered, he looked back at Luffy. By the way, Luffy. I heard you met your old man a while back. And this is where he drops the bombshell, Usopp whispered. How could he mention that Luffy's old man was one of the most dangerous people in the world like it was nothing? Luffy, however, looking baffled by what Garp said. Huh, he asked predictably. My dad? I don't think so. I didn't even know I had a dad. Which is for the best if you ask me, Robin nodded, knowing that never telling Luffy the truth about Dragon was probably the best thing that Garp had ever done for his grandson. Garp suddenly smirked as he began to pick his nose. That's a shame, he admitted, I'd thought he'd introduce himself to you. From what I hear, he saw you off at Logatown. Well, he did, Chopper said, goosebumps going up his spine at the memory of how powerful he was. But he didn't stop to chat. Not that there was time, Robin pointed out. As strong as Dragon was, it's best that he doesn't stay in one place too long. It could end up causing problems. What I want to know is how he knew Luffy would be there. Frankie said, thinking it over. If Dragon really did travel all over the world, how is it that he and his son were able to meet up at the same island at the same time? Luffy's first bounty came out a little while before you arrived at Logetown, right? Robin asked, taking a very good guess. I suppose that Dragon must have seen it and guessed. After all, he must have known that he was a pirate. And before any pirate goes to the Grand Line, they always stop at Logetown. He must have arrived, wanting to see his son off. But why didn't he introduce himself? Brook asked. Luffy-san would have been happy to know he had a father. Who knows? Robin shrugged, truly not having an answer to that. But he seemed to have cared enough about Luffy to help him and all of you escape. Yeah, I guess, Usopp said, thinking it over. As for their past selves, you could all see it in their faces that those who had been to Logetown were thinking back, trying to think of who he was talking about. But they all seemed stumped, none more so than Luffy. I remember what happened, Memory Sanji said, but I sure don't remember Luffy's father. Could you give me a hint? Luffy asked, what's Dad like? I'd like to know myself, past Nami added, I can't imagine it. I'm almost sorry I asked, the current Nami whispered. The name of your father is Monkey D. Dragon, Garp said as if it wasn't anything special. The revolutionary. Nice way to break it to him, Garp, Frankie said, giving him a mock salute. Blunt and direct, and in a room where everyone could hear you. He really is Luffy's grandpa, Nami stated with a weak smile. Luffy blinked, not recognizing the name. Dragon, huh, he repeated. As for most of the others, the news was horrified shock. There was yelling and screaming, the Marines all falling over in stunned disbelief. That Dragon. One of them yelled, the revolutionary has a son. Even though he's famous, Luffy didn't know. Kobe gasped, his eyes wide so that he looked much more like the pudgy kid they met before. Wait, Helmpo yelled, Dragons, Vice Admiral Garp's son. What kind of crazy, mess-up family have they got? That's what I want to know, Usopp exclaimed. I mean, Luffy's family's been crazy for at least 3 generations. Come to think of it, another Marine gasped, I never even heard Dragon's full name before. Dragon sure has done a good job of hiding himself, if no one even knew his full name, Nami pondered. Luffy was one of the only few people who remained calm, but he looked back at them all and was asking them what the big deal was about. Are you kidding? Memory Sanji yelled, his eyes wide and angry, as if upset that Luffy had kept this information secret. Are you trying to tell me you've never heard of Dragon before? He's a dangerous man, past Nami added almost as loud, like, really dangerous. That's an understatement, sis, Frankie said. I mean, even I've heard of him. And I'm usually clueless to stuff like that. I didn't know about him until I met all of you, Brook reminded them. That's because you've been out of contact with the rest of the world for about 50 years, Chopper stated guiltily. Sorry, he added. Don't be, Brook said, waving his apology away. I understand, and it has been rather difficult for me to catch up on all that's happened while I've been away. I learned so much over the last 2 years that it was enough to make my brain hurt. Not that I have a brain anymore since I'm a skeleton. Yo-ho-ho-ho. As for most of everyone else, they were staring at Luffy as if he suddenly turned purple and grew an extra head or something freaky like that. Frankie and the Square Sisters all looked like they had seen a ghost from the way they were staring at him, and even Chimney and Kokoro seemed too stunned for words. Current Sanji suddenly spotted Memory, Usopp and Yokozuna watching from the open window, and they looked like they had just been hit in the face with something heavy, looking ready to pass out. The only ones in the room who seemed to take the news in stride were Garp, Zoro, and Robin. You guys don't seem surprised, Chopper pointed out when he looked at the two of them. Why should it matter to me who his father is? Zoro asked with a shrug. Who his old man is has nothing to do with Luffy now, does it? We've been sailing all that time with him, haven't we? What does it change knowing about it? I was surprised, Robin admitted, but like Zoro said, nothing changed. We just knew a little more than we did before. Well, when you put it like that, Usopp said, thinking it over. They were right, Luffy was still Luffy, wasn't he? Speaking of which, Luffy was the only one who didn't seem to understand what the big deal was, and he turned to look at Robin. She admitted that she wasn't sure how to explain this, but she answered him the best that she could. She told them that while most pirates don't try to go against the world government, the revolutionaries were trying to build enough strength to try and overthrow them. Thanks to them, the government had already lost control in several regions around the world, and have named Dragon as the most dangerous man in the world. Though no one knew anything about him despite the government's best efforts. And yet, past Robin finished, folding her arms. And yet what? Luffy asked, yet this time she remained lost in thought. She glanced back at him, and he seemed to understand that she didn't know anything else. Luffy turned back to his grandpa, who never once stopped hammering. Suddenly, as if he realized something, he froze in mid-hammer. Ah, that was a mistake, huh? He asked, glancing back at them. I probably shouldn't have said all that stuff. He burst out laughing. I take it all back. Forget it, okay? And the memory faded around them at those words. I can't believe that he just came right out and said it, Nami said, picking up a stick and shifting it around in the dirt for a moment. I mean, he was the one who said that he never wanted Luffy to find out, but he came right out and said it. Well, I think that it's only natural that the one person who's never heard of Dragon would be his only son, Robin answered with a shrug. After all, Luffy had been isolated with bandits for most of his life. And from what we've seen, Garp made sure that dragons was never mentioned around him. Which was the best thing for him at the time. You really think so? Chopper asked her. If nothing else, Luffy didn't have to grow up with the knowledge of who his father is, Robin responded. Remember how hard Ace had dealing with who his father was? Yeah, Nami said sadly, I suppose, that would be hard to deal with if you had that hanging over your head. Like I said, it doesn't matter, Zoro said, none of it really anymore. After all, the whole world knows now, doesn't it? They all agreed and put it out of their minds as the next memory appeared. They were just outside the Galila building. Luffy, Sanji, and Chopper were there with Kobe and Helmeppo while Zoro looked out the newly constructed window. They appeared to be saying goodbye, at least Garp and the other Marines weren't here. What? Luffy demanded, you guys are going back already? Still around for dinner at least. Not a good idea, current Sanji pointed out. And Kobe voiced his words by reminding him that they were still enemies at the end of the day and that they shouldn't become too good of friends. Kobe looked directly at Luffy and asked, by the way, I was wondering if you've ever heard of the name they use for the second half of the Grand Line. Luffy looked puzzled as Kobe finished. At the second half of the Red Line, to the far reaches of the ocean, is a place that few pirates or Marines have ever seen. They call it, the New World. And that's when you guys first heard about it? Brook asked as it seemed strangely fitting for a strong breeze to brush over them. Yep, current Zoro said smiling as Luffy's eyes lit up. And the two of them both said at the same time, the New World. Hard to believe how much we went through just to get this far, Chopper whispered as he thought about everything they've seen. What a trip it's been. There's a new era coming, Kobe said in awe, and the people who can guide it are gathering on those seas. They say that the one who can master those waters will become king of the pirates. At his words, each one of the straw hats from both times began to feel their hearts racing at the very thought. They were all ready for the challenge, and that was when Kobe went on, and I believe that one of these days, you and I will meet on those waters. And when that time comes, I'll be even stronger. Strong enough to capture you. Because I promised myself, that I'll keep trying, till, he seemed to be having trouble trying to say what was on his mind before he finally blurted out, till first become a Marine Admiral. Nice thing to say to someone, Sanji said lightly, tell them that you're gonna be the reason you're gonna rot in prison. Be nice, Robin smiled. He's gonna have to catch us all first. As if he just realized what he said, Kobe fell to the ground and began to rant on in embarrassment about what he said before Luffy interrupted, Kobe. You said that you're gonna fight me, right? Then you will become that strong. You'll have to. Just typical, Frankie laughed. Luffy's the only person I know who'll encourage a Marine to come after him. Nice job, Luffy. Well, we'll need future rivals someday, Sanji offered as Brook laughed happily. Kobe stopped mumbling and looked up at him in astonishment, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Yeah, but a Marine Admiral. Even if it seems like an impossible dream, so are ours, Brook said, thinking of Laboon and how closer he seemed once they entered the new world. With every step forward you take, you get closer and closer to your final goal. So long as you can keep walking, then you'll get there someday. Well said, Brook, Robin smiled. Next time we see you, we're gonna be stronger too, Luffy said firmly. A whole lot stronger. And you better be more of a challenge than here. Current Zoro smirked as Kobe still gazed at Luffy with the same kind of admiration he had when he was that pudgy little boy who cried so easy. Memory Zoro stuck his head out and laughed a little. Look at that, he teased, turns out you're still a crybaby after all, huh Kobe? Kobe just realized he was crying and he wiped his eyes furiously before he bowed his head low to them all. I'm truly grateful I was able to see you again today. He cried at them as they stared back at him before he stood up. Just you wait, he declared, we're gonna get tougher and tougher. You'll see next time, when we all meet in the new world. He punched the air before he turned and called, farewell. And the memory disappeared after that, watching the two of them run off into the distance. Well, that was nice wasn't it? Robin asked brightly. Even after everything that happened, they're still friends. Of course, it'll take more than that to break friends apart. Frankie cried, his lip quaking as he fought crying again. Damn it, he didn't think he ever cried so much in one night. He was so tired, he wished that they could go back to the Sunny, wherever she was. But then the newest memory popped up and he cheered up a little at the sight of it. They were back at the Galila Company pool, and the party was at full swing. Oh, I remember this. Chopper cried out happily, this was the party we had after the Marines left. To celebrate our victory over Enies Lobby and getting our crew back. Sanji cheered. God, we sure do love to party don't we? Yet one thing about being pirates, you can party. Whereas the Marines were always stuck playing by the book and forced to miss out on them. Where's the fun in that kind of life? Where's the harm in it? Brook asked, boy, does this look amazing. One of the best parties we've ever had, Zoro said, watching his past self drinking what looked like a barrel of booze. There were warm rays of light streaming in around them as they were gathered around the barbecue. Everyone was there, Iceberg and Galila, along with Frankie and the Frankie family, even what looked like most of Water 7 there, and more people kept streaming in. Brook yelled in shock at the sight of seeing the two giants there, which Usopp told him that they joined forces with them at Enies Lobby when they found out that they had been lied to for years by the Marines about their bosses Dory and Bragi. After Usopp told them the truth, they were so angry, that they went on a rampage and helped them out by taking care of the Marines that were following after them. What a cruel thing to do to someone. Brook said angrily. What were they going to do when the 100 years were up and they didn't release them? I guess they hoped that they'd forget about them. Chopper asked, but he was frowning at it. More likely they thought that they wouldn't be around then and so it were the future Marines' problem, Zoro offered. Jackasses, Sanji summed up. But they didn't let that ruin their view of the party. Everyone was celebrating, enjoying food, and laughing. Iceberg and Kokoro were sharing a drink with each other as Zoro, Lulu, and Tilestone were having their own drinking contest. Sniper King was standing on top of a tall tower of tables and was getting them all to sing along while Chopper was being thrown from Sodom and Gomorrah while he laughed like he was on a slide. And from the looks of things, the party was far from over. But at that moment, they noticed something that made some of them laugh. While Memory Sanji was serving Nami by the pool, Luffy quickly stole several more kebabs from the grill and dashed off before Sanji noticed. Luffy ducked down behind a table and stayed there as Sanji went back to see his food gone and went running around looking for Luffy to kill him. Damn him, current Sanji growled. I knew he took all that food. Oh, let him have it. Usopp laughed, after that fight, he deserves it. Shut up, Sanji growled before his expression brightened when he saw Memory Robin coming over to them, a drink in her hands as well. Oh, the one good thing about these memories was the chance of seeing 4 Namis and Robins. What dream come true? Hiding again are we? Memory Robin asked when she saw him stuffing his face. Don't tell him where I am, he asked as he shoved his face full and she laughed. The current Robin blinked. She remembered this, but that would mean Luffy, her past self asked. Was all he could say with his face so full. I wanted to ask you something, she said quietly, and she couched down so that she was at eye level with him. Robin, what's wrong? Current Chopper asked in confusion. I just wanted to ask him something, and now seemed like a good chance, she answered. Her past self patiently waited until Luffy swallowed and asked what the problem was. She didn't look at him at first, her attention on the glass in her hands for a moment before she asked him, why did you do it? Because I was hungry. He asked, clearly thinking that she was talking about taking the food when Sanji wasn't looking. She chuckled. No, she said, glancing back to look him in the eyes, I mean, why did you go so far to save me? Robin, current Nami said in surprise as she looked to their Robin. Why did you ask? I was just curious to see what he would say, she smiled. That's all. And it was true. After 20 years she finally found the place where she belonged, and funnily enough, it had been right where she least expected it. For the first time in years, she remembered how alive she felt. How happy she was to be back in the crew, and even safe. A feeling that she couldn't ever remember having before. Not since when Saul protected her. She suddenly remembered the memory of when Luffy tried to get Ace to come with him to get those snake eggs, how he told Ace that he felt safe with him there. She wondered if he had felt as safe with him as she did with all of them. She thought about everything that happened that. She could see it all clearly in her mind. The taste of salt that was in the air when they were on the bridge of hesitation, her teeth scraping against the stone as she bit down to give her crew extra time, how Spandam kept pulling her hair and punching her to get her to let go. For the first time in years, she truly wanted to live. They all risked so much for her and she owed it to them to keep fighting no matter what. She had been terrified at the thought of dying that day, and she clung to the life that the rest of the world condemned. She didn't care what anyone else thought. She decided that as long as her friends wanted her to keep living, as long as they wanted her by their side no matter what the cost, she owed it to them to keep holding on. She believed in them like she never believed in anyone else before. She could only smile as Luffy blinked at her in surprise. Why? You're our friend. Why else would we do it? Her past self smiled, as if she knew the answer already, but merely wanted to hear it straight from his mouth. And you see? He asked, now drooling over the last remaining kebab, I told you we'd save you, didn't I? She only laughed as she nodded. I'm glad. Thanks for that, she said as she stood up. I hope that I don't disappoint you. Just as long as you don't do it again. He said firmly. That's your first order after rejoining. Once he was finished he stuffed his face with the rest of his food before she smiled back down at him. Don't worry, she reassured him. I don't plan on leaving like that again. So long as you mean it, he said, at least that's what they thought he said since his mouth was so full. Memory Robin held up her drink, as if toasting him before she walked away, getting Memory Sanji's attention, and giving Luffy time to sneak around them. He even gave her a grateful wave behind Sanji's back before he went running off to join Chopper in playing around the King Bulls. That jerk, Sanji yelled furiously as he saw his past self forgetting all about Luffy as he looked at Robin. Just trying to be helpful, Robin told him, and at the sight of her happy expression, he forgot about being angry at Luffy all over again. But as he went on with a speech of his undying love for her, she couldn't help but think back to when she was still clinging to the bridge with nothing but her teeth. She had decided at that moment that she wasn't going to let their efforts to save her go to waste. Maybe it was selfish, but she had decided that she wanted to be with them. She wanted to stay by their sides forever. And if there was any kind of afterlife, she hoped that they could somehow sail even after the end.